Chapter 1566. More and more voices rang out, and finally, they converged into one sentence. Outside the mansion, the shouts grew louder and louder. Inside the mansion, Zhu Huiqiu's expression was very ugly. He couldn't understand why the situation had suddenly changed. What had happened? Chen Tian had been urgently summoned from the backyard of the mansion. When he heard the shouts outside, he said nervously, "Your Majesty, this matter must be suppressed. We can't agree to the people's demands." Zhu Huiqiu rolled his eyes at Chen Tian. Isn't this nonsense? It wasn't easy to trick Yang Chendong into coming here. How could he be satisfied if he didn't teach him a lesson? That's enough, Chen Gonggong. Let's talk about what we should do now. Okay. Chen Tian fell into deep thought. But as expected of Zhu Huiqiu's think tank, he quickly raised his head again. Your Majesty, we can only stall for time now. At the same time, we have to act quickly. Chen Tian took a step forward and reported his idea to Zhu Huiqiu in a low voice. Zhu Huiqiu kept nodding as he listened. Finally, he waved his arm and said, "That's right. Let's do it this way. But it's a pity. I'm afraid it will be difficult to capture Yang Chendong alive and use him for our own purposes. Your Majesty, don't worry. When the time is right, I will have a good talk with Bugnam of Gojosian. I don't think anyone is willing to die. Maybe there's still a chance. I hope so. Chen Gonggong, I'll leave this matter to you. Go ahead and do it." Zhu Huiqiu waved his hand and sighed. After watching Chen Tian leave, he thought for a moment and went straight to the backyard of the mansion. In the backyard, Mo Gui was sitting in front of the pond. He seemed to know that Zhu Huiqiu was coming. There were 2 teacups in front of him, and the tea was still steaming. "King of the 3 provinces, please take a seat." Mo Gui modestly invited Zhu Huiqiu to take a seat in front of him. Zhu Huiyun admired Mo Gui's calmness very much. His originally restless heart seemed to have calmed down at this moment. "Mr. Mo, I'm actually here to ask for your advice. In your opinion, how do you think we should resolve the current situation?" Mo Gui wasn't surprised by Zhu Huiqiu's answer. After a sigh, he said, "Your Highness, as I said before, my master's intention is to wait for Yang Chendong to enter the courtyard before making a move. After all, there are only 500 people. As long as we do our best and don't fear losses, the victory will be ours. To deal with Yang Chendong, either you don't make a move, or you have to go all out. You can't have the slightest bit of wishful thinking, and you can't even try to probe him." Seeing that Mo Huiguan was about to go on, Zhu Huiqiu quickly interrupted him. "Mr. Mo, let's not talk about what happened before. Let's talk about what to do next. I really didn't expect this Bugnam of Gojosian to know how to threaten the people's will. Now this prince has a headache. It doesn't matter. We just have to make a move later. I just don't know if your Highness is ready to make a move now." Mo Gui said the word "yes" in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. "Of course we have to make a move. I've already discussed it with Mr. Chen. We'll do our best tonight. We have to take down Bugnam of Gojosian, dead or alive." Zhu Huiqiu told Mo Gui about Chen Tian's idea. "Good. Since your Highness has made up your mind, don't worry about it. If anything happens, my master won't just stand by and watch. My master has prepared a backup plan. Yang Chendong must die." Mo Gui's face was full of murderous intent as he said this. This was the final mission his master gave him. If he didn't complete it well, his head would roll. In comparison, he certainly hoped that Yang Chendong would die, not him. When Zhu Huiqiu heard Mo Gui say that he had a backup plan, he felt good. This was the result he wanted. Now that he had achieved his goal, he nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I'll have to trouble Mr. Mo. Of course, if you need my help in any way, just let me know. Ha ha ha. The change in public opinion made Zhu Huichuan's 3-day attack turn into a 1-day attack. He was going to see the results tonight. For this, Wang Zhangjiang received a large number of reinforcements. A total of 4,000 soldiers rushed out of the courtyard. 5,000 soldiers fought against 5,000 civilians and chased away the stick-wielding civilians. When the commoners saw so many soldiers from the 3 provinces outside the small courtyard, their anxious hearts relaxed. With so many soldiers protecting Bugnam of Gojoseon, their safety shouldn't be a problem. They scattered in all directions. However, when Yang Chendong, who was in the courtyard, learned about the situation outside, his expression became much more dignified. He had a feeling that it was time for the dagger to be revealed. Beta Persei, take out all the weapons and ammunition of the Black Cavalry and equip them. Young master, are they going to make a move? Beta Persei asked cautiously. Maybe, maybe not. But it's not wrong to be prepared. Go do it. Yang Chendong waved his hand, then returned to his desk and began to draft a telegram. Once Zhu Huichun turned hostile, he would have to send the main force of the 5-star army to the 3 provinces. At that time, he would have the right to do so. This time, the other party didn't want to give him face. Presumably, once the news spread, the civilians would understand his decision to send troops, and there would be less resistance. It had to be said that for the safety of the 3 provinces, Yang Chendong did a lot and was willing to take this risk. This was completely in line with his goal of bringing the Han people to the top of the world. 5,000 against 500, this was the first dish that Zhu Huichun prepared for Yang Chendong. If things didn't go well, he would continue to deploy troops. Speaking of which, in Yunnan Prefecture, he had 50,000 troops stationed there. He didn't believe that he couldn't kill Yang Chendong with 100 times the force. In a courtyard 2 alleys away from Yang Chendong's courtyard, 200 strong warriors were sharpening their swords. If Zhu Huichun could see them, he would recognize that the leader was Muong from the Mu family of the Shiping King. Muong, the nephew of the current Shiping King, Mu Bin, was the bravest person in the younger generation of the Mu family. Even Mu Bin's eldest son, Mu Tsong, couldn't compare to him. It was because of his bravery that he was given the task of assassinating Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong's existence was a great threat to the great Ming dynasty's political power. It could be said that as long as this person didn't die, it was only a matter of time before he replaced the great Ming dynasty's political power. Because of this, after hearing that Yang Chendong had entered Yunnan Prefecture with only 500 black cavalry, Muong was immediately sent out. The purpose was to complete the task of assassinating Bugnam of Gojoseon. This was a risky move, but when Mu Bin, the king of Shiping, found Muong, he brought his 200 men of sacrifice to Yunnan Prefecture without saying a word and successfully went into hiding. As a member of the Mu family, they were very familiar with Yunnan Prefecture. These 200 men of sacrifice were deeply indebted to the Mu family, so they came with the intention of returning the favor. To put it bluntly, they didn't plan to return alive. The small courtyard was silent, showing the excellent quality of the men of sacrifice. In the corner, Mu Bin was talking in a low voice with the leader of the men of sacrifice. The general idea was that there was a new movement on Zhu Huiyun's side. It seemed that he was going to make a move on Bugnam of Gojoseon and Yang Chendong tonight. Well, keep an eye on them. It's fine if they succeed. If they don't succeed, it'll be our turn to attack. In short, Yang Chendong must die. Mu Ang's face was unusually firm, holding the idea of success or death. The Mu family was indebted to the Zhu family and guarded Nanjiang for the great Ming dynasty. Everything changed because of the appearance of Yang Chendong. Now, not only did they lose their foundation in Yunnan, but they were also hiding in a small place like Kelisai, not daring to show their faces. Gradually, the name of the Mu family was forgotten by the world. This was something that Muong didn't want to face. Just when the Mu family was feeling helpless, they learned that Yang Chendong had entered Yunnan Prefecture to negotiate with Zhu Huiyun, the king of 3 provinces. They were like people who were groping in the dark suddenly seeing the sun, suddenly giving birth to new hope. In other words, if Yang Chendong died, the Mu family had to live. Otherwise, they would die without a doubt. Once the king of 3 provinces was defeated by Yang Chendong, the Mu family would have no soil to live on. Even if they died, they would have no face to see their ancestors. For the sake of the entire Mu family, it was just sacrificing these 200 men of sacrifice and Muang. What was the big deal? Muang made up his mind at this moment. However, what he didn't know was that in a small courtyard in the southern Cloud Manor, there was a group of men in black who were also preparing to fight to the death. They were relatively short, but their murderous aura didn't diminish. They were faintly discernible in the darkness. Yang Chendong didn't know that there was more than one enemy, but he was definitely not afraid. In his goal of achieving the great Han people's revival, he was destined to walk on an unusual path, and was destined to be full of danger. Beta Persei had already taken out firearms and ammunition with Dao Shao and Ba Daojiang and equipped themselves. Not only that, they also took out all the things that could be used and built several blockades. With Yang Chendong's courtyard as the center, they built an arch-shaped temporary trench. Although they couldn't exert their full combat power due to the limitations of the environment and tools, as long as the other party didn't have artillery, it would be difficult to break through their defense line. Tell the soldiers to put on all their equipment. They must protect their own safety. Young Master said that it's fine if the army of 3 provinces doesn't attack, but if they do, they will use all their strength. Our opponents are 10 times, 100 times, or even more enemies. Beta Persei faced a group of black cavalry squad captains and said this with a serious expression. Chapter 1567. Beta Persei couldn't understand why the young master didn't allow them to take the initiative to attack. The situation was obviously very dangerous, and Zhu Huihua's ambitions were completely exposed. What they should do now was to take advantage of the fact that it wasn't dark and suddenly kill their way out. This way, they could catch the other party off guard. Coupled with the undercover intelligence agents in the city, the chances of them leaving the city would be greatly increased. In the eyes of Beta Persei and the other black cavalry, Yang Chendong's safety was naturally the first priority. In order to complete this mission, everyone was willing to sacrifice themselves. They really couldn't figure out why Yang Chendong still hadn't made such a decision. But they didn't know that Yang Chendong had his own reasons for doing so. He wanted to take this opportunity to find out who the traitor was. Ever since he found out about the traitor, Yang Chendong felt like he was sitting on a needle. The feeling that someone could harm him anytime and anywhere made him feel very uncomfortable. In order to solve this problem, Yang Chendong risked his life to come to Yunnan Manor. He didn't believe that the traitor would still hide and not make a move under such an opportunity. As long as the traitor made a move, Yang San might discover something. Once he discovered the traitor, it would be the time for the real acquisition. Only then would the risk be worth it. Taking advantage of this opportunity to let the traitor jump out and then catch them all in one fell swoop was another main purpose of Yang Chendong's trip. As for whether the black cavalry would be in danger by doing this, with the firearms and ammunition he took out from the warehouse, it shouldn't be too big of a problem even if there was a problem. In order to completely eliminate the hidden danger, this risk was worth taking. Once Zhu Huichuo brazenly started to make a move, the nearby 5-star army would gather together. At that time, the 500 black cavalry dragon guards would only need to hold on for 3 days, and the main army would arrive. The danger would also be resolved. These 3 days were the opportunity for the traitor to make a move. He also believed that it would be difficult for the traitor to hold back. After all, it was such a good opportunity. If he didn't make a move, it would be hard to say whether there would be such a chance next time. Sitting in the main hall of the main room, Yang Chendong had already asked Wang Shan to send a telegram to Yang San, asking him to keep a close eye on every move of the 3 provinces, regardless of who they contacted. Or if someone contacted them on their own initiative, they had to follow this clue and investigate it thoroughly. In short, they had to take this opportunity to find the traitor. The black cavalry began to make various preparations, and the sky gradually darkened. Finally, the sky turned completely dark, and the sound of the night watch rang out. About 10 miles into the night, there was finally some movement outside the courtyard. The sound of a large number of footsteps could be heard. "Everyone, get ready. Let's give them a taste of grenades first." The person in charge of the first line of defense was Ba Daojiang, the vice-captain of the Black Cavalry's 1st Battalion. Beta Persei had already informed him that 5 of the 6 gates in the 2 courtyards had been firmly nailed from the inside. In order to prevent the enemy from climbing over the walls, they had buried landmines on the ground of the walls to ensure that no matter how many enemies came, they would all die. This was the only gate in the 6 gates that could be entered at any time. Ba Daojiang was guarding this gate. There were already several light and heavy machine guns set up here, forming a powerful firepower net to ensure that no one could pass through the net and rush in. A full 4 days of dry food and water had also been prepared. As soon as the battle started, the telegraph office would send out a request for help. Then, 3 days later, the main force of the 5-star army would arrive outside Yunnan Mansion. At that time, the situation would be settled. Within these 3 days, Yangchendong's safety would be completely handed over to the 500 Black Cavalry. Everyone was both excited and worried about this sacred mission. They were excited that such a great mission was handed over to them. After completing the mission, this would be the most exciting experience of their lives. They were worried that if the enemy rushed in and hurt the 6th young master, even if it was just a hair, they would not be able to atone for it even if they died 100 times. "We must not let the 6th young master suffer even the slightest bit of harm." This was the common thought of the 500 Black Cavalry. In order to achieve this goal, everyone took out 100% of their spirit, loaded their guns, and aimed at the enemy. The sound of footsteps was getting closer and closer. It seemed that the 3 provincial armies were gathering outside. This created a dark cloud over the people's heads. If it was an ordinary army, they would have been so nervous that they would be sweating profusely. They might even be trembling all over and unable to hold their weapons tightly. After all, they only had 500 people. The 3 provincial armies alone had more than 50,000 soldiers in Yunnan Mansion. This ratio of 1 to 100 sounded really scary. Even if they were holding firearms that were more advanced than this era, the enemy's advantage in numbers was still like a dark cloud. It was so oppressive that it made it hard for them to breathe. However, with 500 Black Cavalry, they were much calmer. As veterans of hundreds of battles, as the Black Cavalry who had participated in 2000 against 100,000 and defeated the enemy without suffering any injuries, they were only excited. In their eyes, the so-called 50,000 enemies were all military exploits. Time passed by minute by minute. The footsteps outside were getting louder and louder. As the Black Cavalry who had rich combat experience, they could tell from the sound of the footsteps that there were at least 3,000 enemies, maybe even more. There were only about 100 soldiers who were guarding this door with Ba Daojiang. However, they were not afraid at all. This was because among the 100 soldiers, there were more than 10 light and heavy machine guns. This gave them a strong sense of confidence. Clang, 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 the sound of the door being knocked was finally heard. The wooden door that was only rigged with a few wooden wedges soon vibrated. At the same time, the soldiers of the 3 provincial armies shouted, "Brothers inside the door, open the door quickly. There are assassins here. We need to go in and search for the assassins." Ba Daojiang scoffed at this lame excuse. He held the grenade in his hand, ready to pull the pin at any time, waiting to throw it out. After a few shouts, the soldiers of the 3 provincial armies finally pushed the wooden door open. They did not expect the Black Cavalry to answer them or open the door. The shouts just now were just an excuse for them to show up. The moment the wooden door was pushed open, a black mass of figures appeared. Countless soldiers of the three provincial armies rushed in like a sluice gate. "Throw it!" Ba Daojiang did not hesitate. After shouting, he threw the grenade in his hand forward. Along with it, hundreds of other grenades were thrown forward. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom, the sound of explosions rose one after another in the dark night. Under the loud explosions, there was a series of screams and screams. Type 95 open fire. As soon as the grenades exploded, Ba Daojiang gave the order. Then, a series of shots were fired in the direction of the door. Some of the soldiers of the three provincial armies who were rushing forward or trying to climb over the wall cried out in pain. This was just the first round of attacks, and there were probably hundreds of casualties or serious injuries. Outside the other 5 doors, there was also a series of explosions. Needless to say, someone must have stepped on a landmine and caused an explosion. This was a sign that the enemy had launched an all-out attack. After a series of gunshots, the area in front of the wooden door became much quieter. The soldiers of the three provincial armies quickly retreated after leaving a trail of corpses on the ground. It was obvious that they were just testing the waters. The black cavalry was the best of the best. The soldiers of the three provincial armies did not expect to be able to break into the courtyard in a single charge. "Quick, this door is open. Everyone, gather here." A thunderous voice came from outside the courtyard. Clearly, after the other courtyards were unable to be opened, this courtyard that was the only one that was opened attracted the attention of even more people. General Wang Zhanjiang, who was in charge of the attack outside the door, began to deploy his troops and rearrange the attack plan. The sturdiness of this courtyard was not bad. Even in the face of a few explosions, it did not collapse. It had to be said that the seriousness of the people in ancient times was much better than the shoddy construction of modern times. Originally, they were worried that the wall would collapse because of the explosion. If that happened, without anything to rely on, the difficulty of defending would be several times greater. Now that he knew that the walls were fine, the commander of this battle, Yang Er, heaved a sigh of relief. "Very good, leave the rest to Ba Daojiang. We will continue to dig the tunnel. We must be quick, we don't have much time left." After speaking, Beta Persei did not care about the battle outside. He waved the military shovel and continued to rise to the ground. At this time, there was a huge pit nearly 2 meters deep on the ground, and it was still deepening. After about a quarter of an hour of rest, the soldiers of the three provincial armies outside the courtyard launched the second wave of attack. Compared to the last time, they had more people this time, and the momentum of the attack was more powerful. "Everyone, don't be afraid. They don't have much firearms and ammunition. As long as they don't have firearms, they can't be our opponents. Charge!" Wang Zhanjiang stood outside and shouted, cheering the soldiers on. Under the general's shout, a large number of figures appeared in front of the wooden door and on the wall. They were all fierce, cheering themselves on as they rushed forward to face the flying bullets. Pa-pa-pa. Pa-pa-pa. Gunshots rang out again, and one by one, the black figures fell on the wooden door or on the courtyard wall. The figures that were alive and kicking just now were now bloody corpses. With just one wave of attack, at least hundreds of soldiers from the three provincial armies died. In this regard, Wang Zhanjiang, as the commander, did not have the slightest hint of pain on his face. These were all ordinary soldiers. In the eyes of the general, their lives were as cheap as dogs. If they died, they died. As long as there was money and food, they could quickly raise a new army. Chapter 1568. Charge. Continue to charge. The enemy's firearms can't possibly have unlimited gunpowder. Charge. Charge. Wang Zhanjiang yelled at the top of his lungs as he commanded the soldiers to charge into the courtyard one after another. It was as if they would not stop until they reached their goal. The charging troops came one after another. Even though the number of corpses on the ground was increasing, it still could not stop them from charging forward. As the charging momentum became more and more ferocious, they finally relied on their advantage in numbers to charge into the courtyard. They were less than 80 feet away from the black cavalry. Machine gun team, get ready. Fire in one shot. Other than occasionally shooting with the 95 style, Ba Daojiang had been observing the changes in the battle situation. Seeing that the enemy's attacks were getting more and more ferocious, he could no longer control the situation by relying on the 95 style. Hence, he gave the order to the machine gun team. The so-called fire in one shot referred to the fact that they could only fire a clip of bullets. This way, they could stabilize the situation and not waste bullets. The machine gun team members who were already itching for a fight could only watch helplessly when they saw their comrades killing the enemy to their heart's content. Now that they had finally received the order to open fire, how could they be courteous? All the light and heavy machine guns rang out, and the bullets rained down like rain. The soldiers of the 3 provinces who had barely escaped death fell to the ground one by one. Da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Under the sound of the machine guns, not a single living enemy could be seen in the courtyard in less than 20 seconds. The advantage that the 3 provincial armies had gained with great difficulty was wiped out in an instant. The dense sound of machine guns also caused the 3 provincial troops who were preparing to continue their charge to slow down. Then, Wang Zhanjiang yelled, "Stop charging! Stop charging!" They had no choice but to stop. Under such dense gunfire and the terrain that was less than 50 feet wide, the number of people sent out would be the same as the number of people who died. Calculate the casualties. Wang Zhanjiang yelled loudly. Then, he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Just a moment ago, he was prepared to lead the charge in order to encourage the soldiers. After all, there were already people who had charged in. In his mind, as long as he could charge in front of the black cavalry, he would be able to utilize the advantage of cold weapons. At that time, with the advantage of superior numbers, he would be able to exhaust his opponents to death even if he had to exhaust them. However, a burst of concentrated gunfire made him think that it was a close call. At the same time, he also completely withdrew the idea of taking the lead to attack. That was a flintlock, and when it hit a person's body, a hole would appear, and a person would die. Even if a civet turned around and had 9 lives, it would still die miserably in such a situation. Even so, if he had nothing better to do, why would he lead the charge? That was not a charge, but a fight to the death. At the same time, Wang Zhanjiang couldn't figure it out. When the black cavalry entered the city, he didn't see them carrying any heavy firearms. So what was going on? Also, didn't the black cavalry have limited ammunition? But from the looks of it, how could it be limited at all? They didn't have the slightest intention of saving when fighting. He cursed in his heart. He didn't know who provided the information that the 5-star army didn't have enough ammunition and almost got him killed. He then waited for the battle damage statistics. The Kiliarchs and Centurions below played their roles and quickly reported the battle situation to him, the commander of the army. When the final statistics came out, even though Wang Zhanjiang was already prepared, he still couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. 3,200 people. From the beginning to the end, not even half an hour had passed, and 3,200 soldiers had died. Among them, there were 400 soldiers who died outside the other 5 courtyards. The number of soldiers who died at the courtyard gate in front of him reached 2,700. Looking at this shocking number, Wang Zhanjiang looked back in disbelief. Only then did he realize that the originally densely packed army had been reduced by a lot. Only a little more than a third of the original 5,000 people were left. Don't charge for now, wait for orders. Wang Zhanjiang quickly made the decision to stop the charge and report the battle results. After all, if he continued to charge, he was afraid that his less than 2,000 subordinates would only be feeding bullets to the enemy. If he didn't handle it well, the black cavalry would see through him. If they counterattacked, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop them even if he wanted to. He left a few confidants and ordered them to keep an eye on the 5-star army in the courtyard. No matter what, he couldn't let them suddenly go out. He then rode on his warhorse and went straight to the king's mansion. The sound of gunfire could be heard throughout the city. Zhu Huiqiu, who was in the king's mansion, was naturally no exception. At this moment, he was pacing back and forth in the main hall of the 5 prefectures. Although he hadn't received the relevant battle report yet, from the dense gunfire, he had a feeling that the situation wasn't very favorable. Wang Zhangjiang came and immediately stood in front of Zhu Huiqiu and reported the battle situation. Hearing this, the expression of the 3 provincial kings changed again and again. After a while, his face darkened. "You're saying that the black cavalry has enough ammunition and they don't have any intention of stopping shooting?" "Yes." Wang Zhangjiang lowered his head. After sensing the king's anger, he didn't even dare to raise his head. "How is this possible?" Zhu Huiqiu said in disbelief. After anxiously pacing back and forth a few steps, he asked loudly, "When they entered the city, didn't you all see it? Did they bring any carriages?" "No." Wang Zhangjiang lowered his head and answered honestly. "Since they didn't bring any carriages with them, how much ammunition could they bring with them? How is it possible that they can't finish shooting? Could it be that the soldiers below are too afraid of death and can't charge properly?" Zhu Huiqiu couldn't understand and wanted to put all the blame on the soldiers' morale. "No, Your Majesty, the soldiers are already putting their lives on the line. Out of the 5,000 soldiers, I have prepared a team of 500 soldiers. Once they are found to be cowardly and not daring to charge, they will be punished according to military law." Wang Zhangjiang naturally tried his best to explain. He didn't want to be punished because of this and be punished by the king. Zhu Huiqiu still trusted Wang Zhangjiang. Otherwise, he wouldn't have entrusted him with such an important task. However, it was because of this that he couldn't figure out the reason. Now that Wang Zhangjiang was standing in front of him, he suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and asked, "General Wang, why are you here?" "Your Majesty, I'm here to ask for reinforcements. I only have less than 2,000 soldiers. The 500 black cavalry should be unharmed. Under such circumstances, we don't have the ability to launch an attack, so..." "Approved. Take this king's tiger tally and I'll give you 10,000 soldiers. General Wang, everything depends on you. Capture Yang Chendong alive and you will be the greatest contributor. Do you understand?" Zhu Huiqiu didn't wait for Wang Zhangjiang to finish speaking and nodded in agreement. In order to capture Yang Chendong alive, it would be worth it even if he had to use all 50,000 soldiers in the city. Hearing that there were 10,000 reinforcements, Wang Zhangjiang was naturally overjoyed. He immediately said with a solemn expression, "Thank you for your support, Your Majesty." "Don't worry, Your Majesty. With these 10,000 soldiers, I'm 80% more confident that we can capture Yang Chendong alive. Then this prince will wait for the good news from General Wang." "Oh right. Remember, you must stop the attack after daybreak." Zhu Huiqiu reminded him. The situation in the city wasn't very stable. When they attacked in the dark, the civilians couldn't see what was going on. They could only be suspicious, which was easy to deal with. However, once they attacked in the day, who knew what the civilians would do? The situation hadn't reached the most critical point yet, so there was no need to take the risk of attacking in the day. Wang Zhangjiang quickly nodded in agreement. He naturally understood this logic. During the day, he was the one who had led the soldiers to persuade the 5,000 civilians to return. How could he not know that if they attacked in the day and the civilians reacted, wouldn't the situation become even more chaotic? Wang Zhangjiang took the tiger troop talisman and left. 2 hours later, at midnight, he brought 10,000 soldiers to the courtyard. With the arrival of so many soldiers, the streets near the courtyard were quickly filled with soldiers. With so many reinforcements in hand, Wang Zhanjiang's confidence was greatly boosted. With a wave of his hand, he sent out 2,000 soldiers and once again launched a fierce attack on the courtyard. Gunshots sounded once again, from sporadic to concentrated, indicating the intensity of the battle. A few hundred steps away in the courtyard, Yang Chendong wasn't sleeping. Instead, he stood in the courtyard and looked up at the bright moon hanging high in the sky. It was the 14th day of the lunar calendar. The moon in the sky was very bright, but Yang Chendong's heart was a little heavy. The moment Zhu Huiqiu began to turn hostile, Wang Shan had already sent a message to the main force of the 5-star army waiting in Langsun. Presumably, they had already set off. A total of more than 200,000 soldiers should have already entered the 3 provinces. With the speed of the 1st Cavalry Army and the new army's cavalry, they should be able to reach Yunnan Manor in 3 days. At that time, there would be a lot of fighting and killing. When he thought about how many Han people would die in this battle, Yang Chendong's mood was not good. The reason why Yang Chendong had conquered the surrounding areas of the Great Ming Dynasty was because he wanted to take over this place with the smallest price. After all, the people who had lived here for generations were all Han people. The death of any one of them would be a loss to the Han people. If he wanted to bring the Han people to the peak of the world, he needed to have a certain proportion of Han people. Only then would he be considered the king of the world. Originally, he thought that after conquering the surrounding areas and showing enough strength, the Great Ming Dynasty would be afraid of him. At that time, he would only need to pay a small price to peacefully take over this place, allowing more Han people to live better lives and obtain the greatest respect. Chapter 1569. However, he did not expect the Great Ming Dynasty to be so courageous. It could also be said that the 2 emperors of the Great Ming Dynasty were people who would not shed tears until they saw the coffin. They were not frightened by the strength of the 5-star army and even wanted to struggle. Since that was the case, Yang Chendong would not go easy on them. Taking care of the 3 provincial kings first was to make an example out of them. No matter what, Zhu Huiqiu was still a descendant of the Zhu family. Although he killed his brother, it did not change the fact that he was a member of the Zhu family. Yang Chendong only hoped that after taking care of Zhu Huiqiu with an iron fist, Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu could see the difference between them and finally surrender peacefully. Looking at the bright moon, Yang Chendong stood with his hands behind his back. His whole person was enveloped by the moon. The 3 provincial armies' attack was still ongoing. They had the idea of using manpower to consume firearms and ammunition. Wave after wave of attacks did not stop. Ba Daojiang's team had already been replaced. After repelling 4 waves of enemy attacks, the soldiers were very tired. Firing guns for a long time was also a physical activity. It was normal for their arms to be numb and their hands to be weak. At 2:00 in the morning, Dao Shao brought another 100 black cavalry to replace them. When dawn broke, the attack of the 3 provincial armies finally came to an end. The entire courtyard was filled with corpses, and there was even a tall pile of corpses. The stench was so strong that it could be smelled from miles away. It was really nauseating. Outside the courtyard, Wang Zhanjiang was pinching his nose as he ordered the soldiers to clean up the battlefield. Below the courtyard wall, countless corpses were piled up. They were all the soldiers of the 3 provincial armies who had died last night. Looking at the corpses, Wang Zhanjiang's face was bitter. His legs were a little numb. In just one night, out of the 15,000 soldiers from the 3 provinces, more than 12,000 of them had died. This was because he had intentionally slowed down his attack speed in the later stages of the battle. Otherwise, he was afraid that not a single one of the remaining 2,000 or so people would have survived. 15,000 against 500. With a ratio of 30-1, Wang Zhanjiang's side actually lost 5/6 of their soldiers. Not to mention that Wang Zhanjiang had never fought such a war before, he had never even heard of it. He did not know how to face Zhu Huichen and explain to the king. Clean up the battlefield. Make sure to clean up the corpses. At the same time, stay far away from the courtyard. Give the enemy enough time to clean up the battlefield. After giving this order to the soldiers below, Wang Zhanjiang urged his horse to head towards the 3 provinces. Not long after Wang Zhanjiang left, a raging fire also ignited in the small courtyard. The number of soldiers in the black cavalry was limited. Naturally, they could not bury all the enemy corpses that had charged into their ranks. Considering that the weather was starting to heat up, they were afraid that the corpses would attract a plague. After reporting to Yang Chendong, the soldiers used a large fire to solve the problem. They burned all the enemy corpses with cremation. The smell of the burning corpses was quite unpleasant. When a breeze blew, the air in the entire southern cloud manor changed. Therefore, no matter whether it was near or far from the small courtyard, the people in the city all knew that someone had attacked the small courtyard where Bugnam of Gojoseon lived last night. Immediately, for their own safety, many people walked onto the streets and asked for help from the 3 provinces. Zhu Huichen had expected the people's actions. In the morning, he sent another general, Kai Wenju, to lead 5,000 soldiers to tightly seal off the main streets near the 3 provinces to prevent anyone from disturbing him. As for himself, he summoned Chen Tian, Meng Ning, Wu Yingtu, Mo Gui, and General Wang Zhanjiang who had just arrived to report. His right-hand men all arrived. The servants of the manor served tea and snacks. Everyone sat together to discuss the next step. Just as everyone's attention was on Wang Zhanjiang's report, the servants left one by one. One of the stewards first went to the servants' room to say goodbye, saying that he was going out to buy some things. Then, he walked out of the manor openly. This steward's name was Zhu Changjiu. He had been with Zhu Huichen for more than 10 years. He was definitely an old man. This could be seen from the fact that he was given the surname Zhu. He also enjoyed a certain amount of power in the manor. For someone like this, his every move would not be suspected. However, this Zhu Changjiu had actually been bribed by Yang San. Yes, bribed. In order to get in touch with this person, the intelligence department spent a lot of effort. Yang San specially appointed a group of 7 people to get in touch with this person and related matters. For the sake of confidentiality, this group of 7 people was directly led by Yang San. In the entire Yangxia, other than Yang San, only Yang Chendong knew about this matter. However, he only knew about the existence of this group. As for who the specific members were and who they were in contact with, Yang Chendong did not know. This operation could be said to have reached the highest level of security in order to prevent information from leaking out. In the situation of knowing that there was a traitor, but not knowing who it was, Yang Chendong could not completely trust anyone. It was such a small group that did a lot of work for Zhu Changjiu. They investigated everything related to this person's life. It was not easy to find out that before this person came to Zhu Huichen, he had a sister who was 3 years younger than him. At that time, because the family was hit by a flood, the two were separated during the escape. There was no news for a long time. When this news was seen by Bureau Chief Yang San, he felt that there was a lot to be done. At that moment, he put in a lot of effort and mobilized a lot of manpower and material resources to investigate this matter. His hard work paid off, and he really did manage to find out. Coincidentally, this woman was still alive, and she even came to Crimson City by accident. Now, she was already married, and she was a middle-level leader in the textile factory. After hearing this news, Yang San was overjoyed. He brought all the information and paintings about this woman, which was Wang Ling, to Yunnan Manor. Under the arrangement of the 7 small secret group, he met with Zhu Changjiu, this person whose original name should be Wang Chang. When Zhu Changjiu was blocked by Yang San in an alley, he instinctively wanted to shout. Based on his familiarity with the surrounding environment, he knew that there was a street 30 steps behind him. There must be soldiers patrolling on the street. His shout was likely to attract their attention. Just when Zhu Changjiu wanted to shout, Yang San handed over the paintings in his hand. There were a total of 4 paintings. One of them was Wang Ling's current appearance, another was a painting of his parents together in his memory, another was a painting of her and her brother, who was Zhu Changjiu, playing by the river in front of the courtyard when they were young, and the last one was a painting of Zhu Changjiu before they separated. Wang Ling was now a middle-level leader in the textile factory. Her husband's family was an ordinary leader in the city lord's residence. She also gave birth to 3 cute children and they were all studying in Yang Xie's school. It could be said that she had received a lot of favors from Yang Chendong. Now that there was something that needed her help, she would do her best to help. When the 4 paintings appeared in front of Zhu Changjiu, the door of his dusty memory was opened. For a moment, he shut his mouth. Just like this, Zhu Changjiu, who didn't resist, had a long chat with Yang San in a secret and safe place. When he found out that his sister was living well and had given birth to 2 little nephews and a niece for him, Zhu Changjiu cried tears of joy. All these years, it wasn't that he didn't think of looking for his sister. This matter had even alarmed Zhu Huiyun. He had sent people to look for her, but there had been no news. Over time, everyone thought that this woman must have died and was no longer in this world. But happiness came so suddenly. Tell me, what do you need me to do? Zhu Changjiu was also a smart person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been recognized by Zhu Huiyun. He looked at Yang San and asked in a deep voice. Outsiders didn't know what the 2 of them talked about. Anyway, after Zhu Changjiu left the house, he became Yang San's spy. His main task was to find out what other forces were secretly in contact with Zhu Huiyun other than the subordinates of the 3 provincial kings. Regarding this matter, Zhu Changjiu felt somewhat guilty. After all, Zhu Huiyun had treated him well. But when he thought of Yang San's promise that not only could his sister live a better life in Qiqian City, but after the matter in Yunnan, he could also go to Qiqian City to reunite with his sister. In the end, his emotions won over his rationality. Moreover, he only wanted to find that mysterious person, not to do anything to Zhu Huiyun. After thinking this through, Zhu Changjiu accepted this task. Today, he left the mansion to report to Yang San. This was the first time he saw Mo Gui in the main hall. Judging from everyone's reaction, this should be the person Yang San was talking about. In the past, Mo Gui had been hiding in the 3 provincial kings' mansions. Because he lived in a place where outsiders couldn't get close, Zhu Changjiu didn't know. Yang San spent a lot of effort but still couldn't get any news. But now, perhaps because Yang Chendong was surrounded in the courtyard, everyone thought that he couldn't escape. So, they didn't hide Mo Gui and let him come out to meet everyone. Even so, if it weren't for the spies in the king's mansion, it would be impossible to find out about this person's appearance. In the king's mansion, Zhu Huiyun didn't know that Mo Gui had been exposed. He was listening to Wang Zhangjiang's report of last night's battle. When they heard that after a night of fighting, after launching more than 10 attacks and losing more than 12,000 men, they still couldn't break through the defense line set up by the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards, everyone present fell silent. Obviously, the reality was different from what they had expected. The Black Cavalry Dragon Guards were not as limited as they had imagined. On the contrary, they should have had plenty of gunpowder. Chapter 1570. As for how the Black Cavalry did this, it was a mystery that everyone couldn't figure out. The most important question now wasn't to find the answer, but what to do next. Although the transmission of information was too slow and it was impossible to know if the news had already spread, from the information provided by Mo Gui, Yang Chendong might have already made his move. That man had a telegraph. According to Mo Gui, that thing could transmit messages from thousands of miles away or even further away. Last night's attack had already made their position clear. That was, the negotiation was completely fake. Their real goal was to capture Yang Chendong alive. With Yang Chendong's intelligence, he probably already had his suspicions. Last night's attack proved everything. In that case, the 5-star army would most likely make their move. There wasn't much time left for the 3 provincial armies. Everyone at the meeting knew that if they fought head-on, they definitely wouldn't be a match for the 5-star army. This had been proven by countless countries and factions that had been destroyed. In that case, other than capturing Yang Chendong, they had no other choice. We must capture Yang Chendong. Zhu Huichen suddenly stood up with a ferocious expression. Then, as if he had made a decision, he spat out 4 words, regardless of life or death. Finally, Zhu Huichen didn't dare to wait any longer. If he couldn't capture Yang Chendong within the time limit, once the main force of the 5-star army arrived outside Yunnan Manor, he wouldn't have a chance to make his move. On the other hand, as long as Yang Chendong died, even if he didn't capture him alive, as long as he could leave Yunnan Manor before the main force of the 5-star army arrived, he would effectively avoid the first attack. Then, there would be internal strife in Yangxia. When they split apart, it would be time for him to make his move. Zhu Huichen finally made his final decision. This made Mo Gui, who was sitting on the side like a guest, feel joy in his heart. The task given to him by his master was to kill Yang Chendong, not to capture him alive. Unfortunately, Zhu Huichen didn't listen to him on this matter, so he could only watch from the side. Now that both sides had the same goal, he could do whatever he wanted. It should be time to do something. Mo Gui had just made up his mind when Zhu Huihua looked at him. Mr. Mo, I've decided to kill Yang Chendong. Shouldn't you do something? Of course. Mo Gui nodded with a smile. Congratulations, Your Highness. You've made the right decision. If you want to capture Yang Chendong alive, it is indeed somewhat difficult, but if you want to kill Wu Nan Wang who is hiding in the small courtyard, it is not very difficult. What do you mean, Mr. Mo? Zhu Huichen asked expectantly. He already knew that Mo Gui's master wanted Yang Chendong dead, but he wanted to gain more benefits, so he didn't make up his mind. Now that they had the same idea, he believed that Mo Gui would do something to help him. Your Highness, my master has just sent a batch of cannons. They are in a workshop in the east of Yunnan Prefecture. I'll have to trouble General Wang to make a trip there. Mo Gui was still smiling as he told Zhu Huichen the answer he wanted. What did he mean by, just sent a batch of cannons? Only an idiot would believe that. Although the current southern Cloud Manor wasn't heavily guarded, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens to send something as large as a cannon into the city without anyone's knowledge. This could only mean that the cannons were already in the city, but Mo Gui's master wasn't satisfied with Zhu Huichen's idea, so he didn't reveal his trump card. Zhu Huichen quickly figured out the crux of the matter, but he still pretended to be happy and laughed. Good, good. Mr. Mo's cannons are just in time. General Wang, go to the east of the city immediately and move the cannons outside the courtyard. Tonight will be the night Yang Chendong dies. Yes, sir. Wang Zhangjiang stood up with excitement on his face. He had been worried about what to do at night. Looking at the black cavalry, as long as they didn't lack ammunition, it would take a lot of soldiers to charge in. But with the cannons, things were different. With the cannons, they could ignore the enemy's firearms. The courtyard wasn't that big, so they could just bombard it. Then, he could eliminate the black cavalry without touching a single hair of the enemy. With a face full of joy, Wang Zhangjiang accepted the order and left. Not long after, he arrived at the workshop in the east of the city that Mo Gui mentioned. He found 10 cannons and 300 rounds of ammunition in the courtyard. Whether it was the number of cannons or the number of cannons, Wang Zhangjiang was overjoyed. They had wanted to stockpile cannons before, but the southern Ming Empire had imposed a blockade on them, and the 5-star army didn't have any intention of selling cannons, so they could only wait. Now that they finally had the cannons, General Wang felt that his body was full of energy. The cannons were found and transported from the east of the city to Yang Qindong's courtyard in the west of the city. The news quickly reached Yang San's ears. The spies he had hidden in the 3 provinces' armies were finally useful. The news was also sent to Yang Qindong through the radio. 6th Young Master, urgent call. Telecommunications Director Wang Shan nervously sent the newly copied telegram to Yang Qindong. Don't panic, the sky won't collapse. Yang Qindong said confidently. He reached out and took the telegram. When he read the contents clearly, his eyebrows couldn't help but raise high. Then, he fell into deep thought. There were no cannons in the 3 provinces' armies, the only ones that had been used to attack Beijiang Prefecture had all been blown up. This could be seen from the previous intelligence department and various reports. This was also one of the reasons why Yang Qindong dared to enter the city with only 500 black cavalry soldiers. However, the other party now had 30 cannons and 300 rounds of ammunition, which made the situation serious. This didn't mean that Yang Qindong was afraid of these artillery shells. These days, Beta Persei didn't participate in the battle and command the battle. Instead, he led the 300 black cavalry soldiers to continuously dig tunnels. Wasn't it to prevent such a thing from happening? Yang Qindong was now thinking about the source of these cannons. Yang San had made it very clear in the telegram that these cannons were not the field cannons of the 5-star army, but the red coat cannons created by the Southern Ming Dynasty. In recent years, due to the emergence of the 5-star army's firearms, both Beiming and the Southern Ming Dynasty had been forced to invest a lot of resources in the research of cannons. Now, they both had a large number of cannons, but due to the lack of technology, most of these cannons were solid shells, and the range was very limited. Not to mention the power of the cannons, or whether Yang Qindong had prepared for it, the source of these cannons alone was enough to make one ponder over it carefully. Did the Southern Ming Dynasty support the 3 provinces' armies to kill him? Or did the traitor help Zhu Huiming get them? If it was the former, it would be fine. After dealing with the 3 provinces' armies, he could use this as an excuse to start a war with the Southern Ming Dynasty. However, if it was the latter, then the identity of the traitor was somewhat interesting. The traitor understood the situation in the Yangxia dynasty very well, could speak with the Southern Ming Dynasty, and could even obtain such an important weapon like the cannons. Who could this traitor be? For some reason, with the appearance of these cannons, Yang Qindong had a feeling that he could confirm the identity of the traitor one step closer. He could see who in the Yangxia dynasty had contact with the Southern Ming Dynasty and then identify them one by one. The 30 cannons were pushed out of the small courtyard, and Wang Zhangjiang was only waiting for the sky to turn dark. In order to ensure the success of tonight's operation, Zhu Huiming gave another 10,000 soldiers to Wang Zhangjiang, which made him more confident. Zhu Huiming was also very nervous as he waited for the good news to arrive in the palace. While he was waiting, the sky turned dark as promised. When the curfew arrived and there were no civilians on the streets, Wang Zhangjiang impatiently went in front of the cannons and gave the order to fire. There was no prelude, no warning. The moment the cannons came, it was to give the 500 black cavalry in the small courtyard a head-on blow. The attack last night caused Wang Zhangjiang's losses to be too great. With this hatred, he was determined to uproot Bugnam of Gojoseon. Boom boom boom, under the irregular cannon fire, the outer walls of the 4 courtyards and the 3 courtyards quickly collapsed. The solid metal cannons wreaked havoc in the small courtyards as if there was no one there. It was as if they were the boss and those who blocked them would die. Originally, the 3 provincial armies did not have any artillery units, and there was no real standard for how to use these cannons. As a result, the cannons that were fired could fly anywhere. This was also why the attack this time was so powerful. After a few waves of attack, the outer walls of the 2 courtyards collapsed. Many houses were also knocked down by the cannons, causing rumbling sounds of the walls collapsing. Smoke and dust rose into the sky. Even though it was the 15th day of the lunar calendar and the moonlight was very bright, people's vision was still very limited. Looking at this rather spectacular scene, Wang Zhangjiang's heart was filled with pride. He could not wait to see the scene of the Black Knight Dragon Guards being crushed by him. Without the help of firearms, his 10,000 men would only be able to deal with a few hundred Black Knight Dragon Guards. He was confident that he could achieve victory. Each cannon fired a total of 5 cannons, and half of the solid metal cannons were wasted just like that. It also cleared a wide enough space for attack. Wang Zhangjiang immediately stopped the cannons from firing. Then, with a loud shout, the infantry charged forward. Chapter 1571. If they hadn't received the news in advance, it would have been like last night. The Black Cavalry Dragon Guards would have set up a firepower net and blockade outside. In the face of this sudden solid bullet attack, they would have suffered heavy losses. It wasn't impossible for them to lose their defensive line tonight. However, after receiving the news a step earlier, everything was a different picture. Long before the sky turned dark, most of the Black Cavalry had already hidden in the tunnel that Beta Persei had dug. This kind of tunnel was similar to the bomb shelters of the future. Even if it was a burst of fire, it could block it, not to mention a solid bullet. It could not hurt the people hiding here at all. Most of the Black Cavalry were hiding. Only less than 50 Black Cavalry were sent outside. They hid in various houses and used the solid walls to observe the movements outside. This was also to prevent the enemy from launching an attack, so that they could be the first to stop them. It was worth mentioning that these Black Cavalry were no longer holding Type 95 in their hands. Instead, each of them had a rocket launcher. The rocket launcher could easily hit more than 100 steps away. It made them look like they were holding a small mobile cannon with great power. When the cannons of the 3 provincial armies began to fire, the 50 Black Knight Dragon Guards were hiding in the small houses. Although more than 100 solid shells were fired and caused some damage, there were no casualties among the 50 Black Knight Dragon Guards as they were covered by the strong walls. Only 2 of the soldiers were choked by the smoke and couldn't stop coughing. Then, the assault of the 3 provinces began. The 50 of them immediately fired their rockets, and when the cannons landed in the midst of the enemy camp, the shockwaves from the explosion killed, injured, and scattered the black shadows. When the rocket launcher sounded outside, it was equivalent to giving the Black Cavalry hiding in the bomb shelter the order to charge and counterattack. Everyone came out of the tunnel in a line, each holding a Type 95 or a light machine gun. They found the predetermined position to counterattack and began to madly fire and counterattack. The sound of cannons and concentrated gunfire was constantly heard, giving the charging soldiers of the 3 provinces a head-on blow. Completely unprepared, they were caught off guard. Just the thousands of soldiers from the 3 provinces who were charging at the front were wiped out in a single exchange. Not a single one of them survived. The Black Cavalry's methods and enhanced firepower really frightened the soldiers of the 3 provinces. They could not help but stop in their tracks. Then, without waiting for orders, they frantically retreated. After a round of bombardment and a round of charge, they had suffered more than 1,000 casualties. When this result was reported to Wang Zhangjiang, it made him even angrier. His face also revealed a crazy expression. Boom, continue to bombard them. Destroy all the houses. I want to see where they can hide. The wave of bombardment just now had already destroyed more than 1/3 of the houses in the 2 courtyards. This allowed the soldiers of the 3 provinces to charge more than 10 steps without any threat. Wang Zhangjiang wanted to use the same method to continue to charge forward, slowly nibbling away the space for the Black Cavalry to survive, and finally gain the initiative of the battle. The cannons were pushed forward again. Each of the 30 cannons fired 2 shells, which meant 60 solid shells rolled in front of the houses. Without the obstruction of the courtyard walls, more than 10 houses were destroyed. This time, the black cavalry did not have a record of 0 casualties. 2 soldiers were injured, and 1 soldier's injury was not too light. Fire at the enemy's cannons, blow them up. Looking at the rocket launcher, Beta Persei roared in anger. The black cavalry were his good brothers, and Beta Persei knew every one of them by name. Now that his brothers were injured, as the actual commander of the black cavalry, how could he not be angry? The Black Knight Dragon Guards, who were also enraged, fired their rocket launchers. They had been waiting for this order. In an instant, several people rushed forward. Under the moonlight, they came within 80 steps of the 30 cannons. Then, they angrily fired their rockets and smashed into the cannons, causing a series of loud sounds of metal colliding. The sudden bombardment directly destroyed several cannons, and even some of the soldiers standing in front of the cannons were blasted into the air by the powerful explosion. When they fell to the ground, they were already dead. Good job, continue. Seeing that there was an effect, Beta Persei continued to shout excitedly. Several more rocket launchers were fired, and the cannons were destroyed one after another. Wang Zhangjiang saw all this, and it made his heart ache. He only had a total of 30 cannons. This was all he had, and it was also all the property of the king of the 3 provinces. If all these were wasted here, he was afraid that he would not be able to explain it to the king. Therefore, with a pained expression on his face, he ordered his men to continue to charge forward, looking for the black cavalry's gunner, and at the same time, distracting the enemy. Then he led his men to move the cannons back, saving the remaining 12 cannons and the 60 shells that were not destroyed. The black cavalry's full-scale counterattack was effective. They defeated the arrogance of the 3 provinces and took back some territory. But after all, it was a fact that so many houses were destroyed. After waiting for less than half an hour, the third charge organized by Wang Zhangjiang began. When the soldiers of the 3 provinces came from all directions, the pressure on the black cavalry multiplied. When there were enemies on all sides, it was not as easy as before to block the enemy outside the position. The sound of the light and heavy machine guns was much more intense than last night. Beta Persei led the 200 black cavalry who were originally digging the tunnel to join the battle, and only then did they manage to stabilize the situation. Under the moonlight, the sparks from the bullets could be seen everywhere. The soldiers of the 3 provinces who rushed from all directions fell one after another, but then they rushed up one after another. At this point in the battle, human lives were the most worthless. At this time, everyone seemed to be red-eyed. Other than shooting, they were charging, and they looked like they would not stop until they fought to the death. Yang Chendong was also standing in the tunnel at this moment. Beside him, Telecommunications Director Wang Shan looked at him expectantly, waiting for orders at any time. But after waiting for a long time, seeing that Yang Chendong did not give any orders, Wang Shan could only look up and down again. As Wang Shan expected, Yang Chendong did indeed have a backup plan in Yunnan manner. Once he mobilized this force, it would be very powerful. But he did not do that, not for anything else, but because he felt that things had not reached the final juncture yet. Just like how he had a backup plan, he had a feeling that his opponent also had a backup plan that had yet to be used. He was waiting, planning before moving. The attack was still going on, and the number of deaths was constantly increasing. General Wang Zhangjiang's face was already covered in cold sweat. Originally, he thought that with the help of the artillery, tonight's attack would be as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Even if he could not capture Yang Chendong alive, he could still kill him. But who would have thought that the other party was clearly prepared? After fighting for nearly 3 hours, there were less than 5,000 soldiers left in his hands. At this rate, he was afraid that when dawn came, not only would he not achieve the expected victory, but he would also not have any soldiers to use. In the past, he had always heard about how powerful the 5-star army was and how powerful their firearms were. But before he really saw it, he did not believe it in his heart. But after 2 consecutive nights of attack, he finally knew how powerful the opponent was. He also finally understood why so many forces and countries would be defeated and even destroyed when facing the 5-star army. Would the 3 provincial armies be wiped out as well? Once this thought appeared in his mind, he could not get rid of it. Wang Zhangjiang's face only became more unsightly. In the prince's mansion, Zhu Huixing was still waiting for the good news in the main hall. However, after sending out wave after wave of people and obtaining the current situation, his expression could no longer be as calm as before. When the sky began to slowly brighten, and the sound of roosters crowing could be heard in the city, he fell into a chair with a thump. He knew that another opportunity had passed in front of him just like that. The sky was already bright, and there was no turning back. Zhu Huixing had no choice but to give the order to retreat. He believed that he still had a chance. Before he lost all hope, he did not want the people to see this scene and cause a revolt. If that happened, who knew what would happen? Early in the morning, the generals came to the 3 provincial princes' mansion again. As usual, Wang Zhangjiang, whose eyes were bloodshot, was the first to give the report. Wang Zhangjiang, who had not rested for 2 consecutive days, felt tired both physically and mentally. But in front of the king, he could only force himself to give a detailed report of last night's battle. When he said that the 30 cannons were all destroyed by the 5-star army and that the soldiers suffered heavy losses in one night, the faces of the people in the meeting became very unsightly. The difference between reality and the plan was too big, so big that everyone could not accept it at the moment. Even though the gunshots rang out until dawn, everyone was mentally prepared for the attack to be unfavorable. But from Wang Zhangjiang's retelling, the result was worse than what they had expected. It seemed that the attack last night, other than destroying the outer walls of the 2 small courtyards and destroying some houses, did not hurt the black cavalry. Oh! Maybe they were hurt, but they did not see it, so they did not calculate it. Everyone comforted themselves in this way. When Zhu Huixing looked at everyone, he gave a different opinion. It's already been 2 days, we don't have much time left. Everyone, what should we do next? There were only 500 opponents, and they were right under his nose, heavily surrounded. However, he just couldn't eat them. This feeling made Zhu Huiyun very unhappy. When he looked at the crowd and spoke, his tone was filled with impatience. Chapter 1572. That's right, Zhu Huihua was anxious. This was because in the morning, when the sun had just risen, the scouts had entered the city and reported that the main force of the 5-star army had begun to move towards the 3 provinces from Liang Mountain. The distance between Liang Mountain and Yunnan Manor was a few hundred li, but the news that came was that the cavalry of the 5-star army was coming on horseback. Who knew if they would suddenly appear in front of him? If he couldn't get rid of Yang Chendong before these people arrived, then it would really be troublesome. This time, he had invited Yang Chendong to negotiate, but now, he had to kill him. In terms of morality, he had already lost. If Yang Chendong didn't die, and the 5-star army arrived outside the city, then the one who would die would be him. Time was of the essence, and Zhu Huihua didn't have the time to think about other things. Right now, what he needed to do was to kill Yang Chendong. Only then would Yang Xia be in chaos, and he would be safe. Only then would he be able to obtain everything he wanted. Tonight, mobilize all the forces that can be mobilized. We must kill Yang Chendong. These words were squeezed out from between his teeth, and Zhu Huihua's expression became more and more ruthless. In this kind of game, where it was either you die or I live, anyone could only use all their strength. After Zhu Huihua made his final decision, the entire army of the 3 provinces in Yunnan Manor began to move. In order to achieve the goal of exhausting the firearms and ammunition of the black cavalry, even the 10,000 new recruits were put to use. However, because they didn't have any combat experience, in order to prevent a large number of people from escaping when the battle started, they weren't placed on the main attack. Instead, they were responsible for the security of the outer perimeter. For 2 consecutive nights, the entire Yunnan Manor's commoners probably knew that Zhu Huihua wanted to kill Yang Chendong. No one knew what these commoners would do. Although these people were often seen as ants, no one could deny that once these commoners took action, they would cause a huge commotion and cause serious consequences. In order to prevent the civilians in the city from doing anything that would be detrimental to their operations, the 10,000 new soldiers that had just been recruited were put to use. Their main purpose was to protect the civilians in the city and prevent them from suddenly causing trouble. Rather than calling them new recruits, it would be more accurate to call them able-bodied men. These people were all captured from various places. They didn't want to join the army at first, but they were unlucky and were captured at the last minute. Among them, there were more than 3,000 able-bodied men captured near Mount Liang. However, everyone knew that more than half of these 3,000 people were cold front warriors. Moreover, they were under the command of Jianghu, the elite 1st Regiment of the 1st Regiment of the Cold Front. Back then, Jianghu had split up the Cold Front warriors and disguised them as local refugees. Furthermore, they had pretended that they were coincidentally found by the army of the 3 provinces. Just like that, they were captured as able-bodied men. Not only did they successfully enter Yunnan Manor without any checks, they were also stationed in the barracks in the city. Logically speaking, the army of the 3 provinces had a set of methods to manage the army. For example, after entering the barracks, they had to go through household registration and so on. With this set of procedures, it would be difficult for the Cold Front warriors to hide their target. Coincidentally, before the army could do anything, Yang Chendong arrived. This instantly attracted everyone's attention, and no one cared about the new recruits anymore. They also helped Chenghu's troops cover for him and stayed in the army. In the past 2 days, the news of Zhu Huihua wanting to kill Yang Chendong had already spread throughout the army. To the ordinary soldiers, this was simply a fight between gods. They only needed to follow orders. The main goal of the Yangxia had always been to let the Han people live better lives and let them become the rulers of this world. However, to the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were not Yangxia soldiers, they did not have the opportunity to experience this kind of glory. On the contrary, they had been receiving military pay from Zhu Huihua, the king of the 3 provinces. Naturally, they had been paid to do something. However, as 10,000 new recruits, they had not even received a single cent of military pay. This was naturally because they had only been here for a short period of time. However, this gave Jianghu and the others an opportunity to instigate a rebellion. If they were dealing with veteran soldiers, Jianghu and the others would have to think twice before doing anything. However, they did not have to be so careful when dealing with a bunch of new recruits who had been captured under the same fate. They could do many things boldly. Over the past 2 days, Jianghu and the others had been trying to instigate a rebellion. However, to be on the safe side, they did not reveal their identities. Instead, they used the identity of someone who had suffered a similar fate to build a relationship with the new recruits. For something like a grievance gathering, no other army in the Yangxia had done better than the Lengfeng army. Within the Lengfeng army, the 1st Division had done the best. For example, during their usual training, they had an assessment on how to gain the support of more strangers in the shortest time possible to strengthen their own forces. All of this was now put to good use. Under Chenghu's persuasion, more than 8,000 of the 10,000 new recruits were convinced. These people's hearts were already moved, and they were filled with all kinds of desires to become a part of the Yang faction's people. Under the propaganda of Jianghu and the others, the slogan of saving Bugnam of Gojoseon and making a contribution to the Yangxia army quickly spread to the people. When they found out that their 10,000 new recruits were also participating in the battle tonight, but were only responsible for the security of the outer perimeter, Jianghu was so happy that he almost jumped up. This was really a case of someone sending a pillow when you were sleepy. They were just worrying about how to get out of the military camp, and now the opportunity was right in front of them. When Jianghu heard the news, he immediately sent someone to contact the secret agents of the security bureau in the city to ask for the next step of the plan. After 2 nights of continuous attacks, especially when the 3 provincial armies even used 30 cannons, the head of the security bureau, Ong San, who was in charge of everything in the city, felt his scalp go numb when he heard this. This method of luring the snake out of its hole and winning the hearts of the people was a good method. However, they should not have let the young master take the risk. For this reason, Yang San had objected to it, but it did not work. Since this was the case, he could only do his best to ensure Yang Chendong's safety. 2 nights had passed, and the 3rd night was about to arrive. Seeing that the 3 provincial armies would launch a new round of attacks in a few hours, Yang San had already made a decision in his heart. He was going to take action, and the only thing he could do was to instigate the people in southern Cloud Prefecture to launch an attack. Although he did not know how many people would die in this way, as long as he could protect the young master, everything would be worth it. At this time, Jianghu sent someone to contact him using a special method. When he found out that the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division of the Lengfeng Division was in the city and had secretly joined the 3 provincial armies as a new recruit, Yang San's bloodshot eyes could not help but brighten up. He was so happy that he exclaimed, "The heavens are really helping me. The heavens are really helping me, Yang Xie." After exclaiming, Yang San immediately ordered the secret agents of the intelligence department in the city to move out and spread rumors in the city. The main thing was that if something happened to Bugnam of Gojoseon in the city, the entire Yunnan prefecture would be razed to the ground. If that really happened, no one in the city would be spared. If they could take action to support Bugnam of Gojoseon, they would be meritorious subjects. Those who made great contributions would be rewarded with silver and land in the future. Although the current Great Ming Dynasty was far from being as strong as before, it still had a certain foundation. At the very least, the state of society had not reached a point of no return. There were still some honest officials and capable officials. If the Great Ming Dynasty was really on the verge of collapse, all they needed to do was to say that they would welcome Bugnam of Gojoseon into the city and the people in the city would be able to make use of them. In order to cooperate with the soldiers of the Lengfeng Division, Yang San had used up all his trump cards. However, Zhu Huiqi did not know about this. Perhaps he had never cared about the people in the first place. In addition, an even greater danger was pressing down on him. In the great general's residence in Guizhou, Jiang Wuqing was currently meeting with a guest in the study. As the great general of Guizhou appointed by Zhu Huiqi, Jiang Wuqing's strength was not weak. With 100,000 soldiers in his hands, he was confident. Even he himself was tall and strong, with a dignified appearance. Jiang Wuqing was a forthright person. From time to time, one could hear him laughing loudly. As a result, he enjoyed an illustrious reputation in Guizhou. However, today, he could no longer laugh. This was because a familiar person had appeared in front of him. It was Yao Yingjun. As the Security Bureau's earliest spy and one of the most successful ones, Yao Yingjun was born with good looks. People called him Pan and the Reincarnation. Using this advantage, he successfully won the favor of Princess Yongsheng, Zhu Lian. He was also able to transmit the situation here to the higher-ups of Yang Xie. Everything came to an end after Zhu Huiying killed his brother. After Yao Yingjun received the information from the Security Bureau, he immediately took Princess Yongsheng away. He quickly formed a group of people and had been roaming around Guizhou. At that time, Yao Yingjun could have brought Princess Yongsheng back to Yang Xie's territory. Based on the important information he had transmitted over the years, the rewards he received would be enough for him to use for the rest of his life. However, he did not do that. Instead, he continued to be with Princess Yongsheng and raised the banner of opposing Zhu Huiqi. Needless to say, Yao Yingjun's act had become real. He had really fallen in love with this princess. Because of this, Yang Chendong also made a promise. No matter when, as long as he didn't want to work anymore and wanted to leave with Princess Yongsheng, he would personally give them permission to find a safe place to live the life of a rich man. Chapter 1573. Those who had done intelligence work knew that it was easy to enter but difficult to leave. After doing intelligence work for a day, it would be difficult for someone who had spent their entire life in intelligence work to leave safely. As such, many people envied Yao Yingjun because of this matter. Feeling grateful for Yang Chendong's kindness, Yao Yingjun decided to do better work to repay his kindness. This time, taking the initiative to meet Jiang Wuqing was a risky move by Yao Yingjun to repay his kindness. When Zhu Huiyun was still alive, Yao Yingjun knew Jiang Wuqing, but they did not have much interaction at that time. As such, when he appeared alone in the Jiang residence, Jiang Wuqing was shocked. Considering that Bugnam of Gojoseon had already entered the Yunnan residence, and now that Yao Yingjun had taken the initiative to appear in front of him, Jiang Wuqing instantly thought of many things. "Come in with me." Jiang Wuqing didn't immediately call for his bodyguards to arrest them. He spoke with a very calm tone. He believed that since the other party had come, it would be in his hands and could be seized at any time. Since that was the case, there was no need to be anxious. It would be better to see what he had to say. Yao Yingjun understood Jiang Wuqing's behavior very well. He had done a lot of homework and fully understood the nature of this Guizhou general, which was why he dared to take the risk alone. Hearing this greeting, he immediately chuckled, cupped his fists, and strode into the residence's inner room. The study was extremely quiet. As the host, Jiang Wuqing boldly sat down on the main seat and placed his sword on the table. His intention was self-evident. If Yao Yingjun could not convince him and give him a reasonable reason, he would probably use force. In response, Yao Yingjun only smiled and found a place to sit down. He then said, "General, do you know that a great disaster is imminent?" Jiang Wuqing's surprise at Yao Yingjun's shocking words disappeared in an instant. He then laughed coldly and said, "What? Is that all you have to say?" Negotiators from ancient times to modern times would often say shocking words in order to put enough pressure on the other party and fight for enough action. Jiang Wuqing had read a lot and had seen things like this before, so he wasn't surprised. Jiang Wuqing's performance fell into Yao Yingjun's eyes. He sighed in his heart at this person's calmness. Then he said, "General, this one is not speaking arrogantly, but this is the truth. Bugnam of Gojoseon was wise and mighty. In just a dozen years, he had conquered and occupied several territories the size of the great Ming dynasty. He had more than 1,000,000 troops under his command, and more than 10 million people under his rule. Wherever Bugnam of Gojoseon went, his enemies were either killed or beheaded. Even if he surrendered at the mere sight of the wind, in order to preserve his life, who could be his opponent?" When Jiang Wuqing heard the praises, he did not have any intention of objecting. All of this was the truth. It was placed right in front of them, and they had no choice but to accept it. On this point, even Jiang Wuqing had some admiration in his heart. After praising Yang Chendong, Yao Yingjun continued, "Today, my lord has come to Yunnan Manor. Presumably, I don't need to say more about what will happen next. General, you should know what will happen, right?" Faced with this question, Jiang Wuqing knew that he had to say something, so he said, "Brother Yao, you flatter me. As far as this general knows, my lord has already laid an inescapable net in Yunnan Manor, and Bugnam of Gojoseon only brought 500 followers into the city. Now that 2 days have passed, I'm afraid that Bugnam of Gojoseon is now under my lord's control." Jiang Wuqing only received the news that Yang Chendong had entered Yunnan Manor this morning. At that time, he was indeed shocked by Yang Chendong's spirit of risking his life alone, but at the same time, he was extremely impressed. Although Jiang Wuqing did not mention it to anyone else, he knew very well that this time, Yang Chendong appeared in Yunnan Manor and made such a risky move in order to save the people of the three provinces from the suffering of war. Unfortunately, Jiang Wuqing knew his master very well. This was a master who would kill his own brother without hesitation. Such a person only had interests in his eyes, so how could he be honest? He could not understand. If he could see this point, then the wise Bugnam of Gojoseon should also be able to see it, but why did he still risk his life? Just as he was wondering in his heart, Yao Yingjun arrived. A sense of curiosity arose in his heart. He wanted to see what Yao Yingjun thought about this matter and what he had to say. How could Jiang Wuqing know that it was precisely because he had just received the news from Yunnan Manor that Yao Yingjun appeared in order to force the other party to make a statement at the first moment? After all, Jiang Wuqing was a very magnanimous person who treated the people well. He was considered a good official, so it was better to try to win over such a person if he could. Ha ha ha. When Yao Yingjun heard this, he threw his head back and laughed heartily. Just as Jiang Wuqing was confused and somewhat confused, he suddenly stopped and said, "What's wrong? General, do you think that you can keep my master with the means of the three provincial kings? To be honest, since my master dared to enter Yunnan Manor, he naturally made all kinds of preparations. How could he be easily controlled by others? If he did not have such means, how could he have today's achievements?" Jiang Wuqing still believed Yao Yingjun's words from the bottom of his heart. He also did not believe that Yang Chendong, who had always been invincible, would take such a risk. However, he just could not think of any way to break out of this situation. Out of curiosity, he could not help but ask, "Oh. But what means does Bugnam of Gojoseon have?" Ha! Shaking his head, Yao Yingjun did not answer this question. In fact, he himself did not know what means Yang Chendong had left behind. If he did not know the reason, how could he solve other people's doubts? Yao Yingjun, who did not answer this question, only said, "General, just wait for the result." But then he mentioned the purpose of his visit, which was to persuade Jiang Wuqing to surrender. "General, since my master has come to Yunnan Manor, presumably there will be a result soon. And I can say with certainty that the final loser will be Zhu Huihua. Then, may I ask, once the three provincial kings are captured, what will the general do?" After saying these words, Yao Yingjun kept staring at Jiang Wuqing's eyes, as if he wanted to find the answer he wanted. What to do? This was what Jiang Wuqing needed to consider. The Great Ming Dynasty system valued the civil and despised the military. It was destined that the social status of the military would not be too high. For example, if a scholar made a mistake, he would often be held high and let go lightly. This was because behind him were his schoolmates, fellow townsmen, peers, and colleagues. Even if he made a mistake one day and left a way out, they would all stand up and speak up. On the other hand, if a military general made a mistake, he would often be thrown into a bottomless abyss. It was even possible to go down to the 18 layers of hell. This was especially true for those civil officials. In order to suppress the status and development of military generals, they would spare no effort in using all their strength. This was also the reason why military generals received far less treatment and reputation compared to civil officials, even though they were both subjects. Jiang Wuqing was born a military general. In the past, he did not know how many military generals and ancestors were played in the palms of the civil officials, and even had their families destroyed. Among these people, some really did make mistakes, and some were directly wronged because they offended someone. And even if they really did make some mistakes, should they be punished? Also, should the families of these military generals be so heavily implicated? At best, they would be exiled and made into slaves. At worst, they would be killed. However, because the right to speak was in the hands of the civil officials, even if some military generals had different ideas, they could only endure it in their hearts. Therefore, even though they were both officials, a military general was much more cautious than a civil official. And now, Yao Yingjun was asking him what to do, which made it difficult for Jiang Wuqing. He was indeed promoted by Zhu Huihua. Before this, he was only a chilly arch. Now, he could command 50,000 soldiers and become the general of a province. With this kindness, he indeed had to thank Zhu Huihua. But of all things, Zhu Huihua should not have provoked Bugnam of Gojosian. Who was that person? He was an existence that could easily destroy grassland wolves. How could their local army compare to such a person? Even if Bugnam of Gojosian entered Yunnan Manor and something happened. But what about the other people in Yangxie? Would they take revenge? Moreover, he had already heard that Bugnam of Gojosian had appointed a prince, which was his successor. Would they really collapse? Taking a step back, if Bugnam of Gojosian's Yangxie collapsed, what good would it do to him? Based on the fact that he had once served Zhu Huihua, not only would Yangxie's people not forgive him, but the civil officials in the southern Ming dynasty would also not let him off easily. If he was lucky, he would be dismissed. If he was unlucky, then he and his family would die. Thinking of his 4 children, the youngest of whom was only 4 years old, how could Jiang Wuqing bear to see them die because of him? For some reason, Jiang Wuqing's heart was filled with a sense of desolation at this moment. When he thought that because of him, his family would be implicated and die, he felt a burst of anger in his chest that wanted to erupt. It made him feel a burst of air and his heart beat rapidly. Jiang Wuqing's heart could be said to be filled with complex feelings, and all of this fell clearly into Yao Yingjuan's eyes. He felt that things could be done, so he laughed and said, "General, I don't think I need to say more about your situation. This time, the 3 provincial kings want to be enemies with my master, so they are destined to have a miserable end. How could such an unwise person be worthy of you working your life for him? Why don't you turn back now?" Bugnam of Gojosian said that as long as General is willing to surrender, not only will he not make any mistakes, but he will also give you merit. Even if we are all Han, he will give you wealth and ensure the safety of General and your family. Chapter 1574. These words were just right, and they also touched Jiang Wuqing's heart, causing him to be moved. However, considering that he had once received Zhu Huilio's kindness, would it be too unjust to do so? Also, how trustworthy was Yao Yingjuan's words? Jiang Wuqing had already opened his mouth to agree, but he closed it tightly again. There was no such thing as betrayal in this world. The only reason there was no betrayal was because the bargaining chip was not high enough. Or perhaps the threat was not high enough. If Yao Yingjun had not found him before, Jiang Wuqing might have had a choice and could have chosen the right time. However, now that Yao Yingjun had found him, he could only make a choice. He could either agree or not. Could he not agree? No one was willing to surrender. However, how could Jiang Wuqing, with a mere 50,000 soldiers, stop the 5-star army's might? Furthermore, the 50,000 soldiers under him belonged to the local army. In the end, their combat strength was only average. With such an army, Jiang Wuqing had already lost the confidence to fight against the experienced 5-star army before the battle even started. Whether it was because he had seen the situation clearly or because his strength was not enough, Jiang Wuqing had no choice but to make a decision. He looked at Yao Yingjun and asked, "But I don't know, if I choose to surrender to the 5-star army, what kind of guarantee can I get?" Southern Cloud Manor. There were less than 2 hours left before the sky turned dark. A gloomy atmosphere shrouded the city, giving people a very oppressive feeling. For the past 2 days, the commotion at night was not small, especially last night. The sound of cannons and gunshots were so dense. Anyone who was not a fool would know what was going on. It must be said that the common people were the most honest group. As long as they could survive, they would not do anything excessive. For example, words like swallowing their anger and living an ignoble life were used by them. However, when something happened and threatened their lives, they would change into a different appearance and reveal their fangs. In other words, the mighty army of the East had awakened. Who was Bugnam of Gojoseon? Needless to say, everyone in southern Cloud Manor knew. There were even many people who yearned for the Yangxie's life and thought of ways to seek refuge there. Originally, Yang Chendong had a good foundation of the people. This time, Yang Chendong was willing to take the risk in order to not let the common people of the three provinces suffer from the chaos of war. At this moment, he had won the hearts of the people. This was the general trend that Yang Chendong needed. Now that the general situation had been set, but the three provincial kings still wanted to kill Wu Nan Wang, how could the common people in the city be willing to do so? This was no longer a matter of two kings fighting. If things went wrong, the common people in the city would be affected. If they still did not do anything, in the end, the city would be killed. Once such a terrible result appeared in the minds of the common people, who could remain calm? It was at this time that the spies sent by Yang Sen came into effect. They mixed in with the common people and talked about the powerful relationship. More and more common people felt the crisis. Finally, waves of common people in the city began to rush in the direction of the destroyed courtyard with all kinds of weapons in their hands. Southern Cloud Manor was a big city. Not to mention its history, just the fact that it was the place where the former Sheeping Mansion and the current mansion of the three provinces were located, it had attracted a lot of commoners. The number of commoners here had reached more than 500,000 people at one point. Due to the chaos of war, the proportion of adult men was not high. However, even if the ratio was 10-1, it was still possible to gather 50,000 people. Not to mention, when the matter concerned their own safety and life and death, it was not only the adult men who would stand up. Some of the older men and some of the younger women also stood up together in order to seek a way out. They formed a mighty team and slowly rushed to the courtyard where Yang Chendong was. The kings of the three provinces who were paying close attention to the situation in the city quickly reported the matter to Zhu Huihua. In this regard, the kings of the three provinces who already had a countermeasure ordered to send out 20,000 veterans and 10,000 newly recruited able-bodied men to guard the periphery. Once they found that the common people dared to attack the former, they would be killed without mercy. At the same time, Zhu Huihua also gave the last 15,000 soldiers he had left to Wang Zhangjiang. The mission he gave him was to take Yang Chendong's life tonight, no matter what the cost. This was a desperate move, and no one stopped him. Although this was the last resort, at this moment, there was no better way to do it. But what Zhu Huihua did not know was that just tonight, two other assassination teams had also started to take action. They were the men of sacrifice of the Mu family led by Muang and the 100 ninjas led by Mo Gui. The men of sacrifice of the Mu family led by Muang have been lurking in the city for several days, waiting for the right opportunity to take action. There was no doubt about it. Although the Mu family also looked down on Zhu Huihua and would take his life if there was a chance. But in the face of a more powerful opponent, Yang Chendong, they had no choice but to work together to deal with this big problem first. For this reason, Muang has made up his mind to succeed or die trying. Fortunately, after 2 consecutive nights of attack, the outer courtyard of Yang Chendong's residence has been conquered, and the range of activity has been reduced a lot compared to before. Under such conditions, once the men of sacrifice of the Mu family rushed to Yang Chendong's side, they still have a high chance to kill the target and complete the mission. Let's talk about the 100 ninjas led by Mo Gui. This is a force that no one knows about. Ninjas are best at hiding. In addition to Mo Gui's arrangements, no one noticed them, even Yang Chendong didn't know about their existence. What's more worth mentioning is that the leader of this group of ninjas is the special ninja who has been on Yang Chendong's death list. This special ninja, who should have died in the assassination of the Timur Empire's General Mandolatu, has now come to Yunnan Mansion without anyone noticing. In the dark, he is like a poisonous snake. Once he sees the opportunity, he will decisively attack and release his powerful energy. These two dark forces, one left and one right, stared at the dilapidated small courtyard, waiting for the best opportunity to appear. In the small courtyard, Beta Persei, Dao Xiao, Ba Daojiang, and others were also doing the final inspection. Years of war made them feel as if dark clouds were looming over the city. Everyone knew that the enemy's attack tonight would only be more ferocious compared to the attack of the previous 2 nights. Fortunately, they have enough firearms and ammunition in their hands, which is their strongest confidence. During the day, they have already dug trenches to ensure that the soldiers can hide in them and kill all the enemies under the premise of enough self-protection. Beta Persei, leave a gap in the east. It was unknown when Yang Chendong had changed into the golden cloak. Although the sky was turning dark, it was still dazzling. Under the illumination of the remaining light, it emitted a myriad of rays of light, giving people the feeling that he was a god descending to the mortal world. Young master, you. Beta Persei was surprised when he heard this. Once a gap is opened, it may give the enemy an opportunity to rush into the small courtyard. If that's the case, it will be too dangerous. Execute the order. Yang Chendong didn't explain too much. Of course, he knew what he was doing. This is indeed a little risky, but if he doesn't do this, how can he find the forces hidden in the dark? Moreover, with his grandmaster-level skills and the large warehouse that he can use at any time, is there really nothing to be afraid of? Perhaps this is the boldness of the skillful. Not to mention, who doesn't have a backup plan? Since it was Yang Chendong's order, regardless of whether Beta Persei is willing or not, he can only carry it out in the end. A gap naturally appeared in the east. However, it is not obvious, at least not at a glance. This is exactly what Yang Chendong needs. If the gap is too obvious, isn't it the same as telling others that this is a trap? The reason why Yang Chendong chose to take the risk this time is to see if he can find the whereabouts of the traitor. If his defense is foolproof, how could the traitor appear? The Black Cavalry, who have long been prepared for a tough battle, checked the weapons in their hands for the last time. The telecommunications director, Wang Shan, also came to Yang Chendong's side and reported the contents of a few telegrams that he just received. 6th Young Master, Yao Yingjun has persuaded Guizhou Province General Jiang Wuqing and has now taken over their military power. He has also sent 20,000 troops from Guizhou Province to Yunnan Prefecture. 6th Young Master, after a day and night of long-distance attacks, my main army is now less than 300 miles away from us. They are confident that they will arrive outside Yunnan Prefecture before noon yesterday. 6th Young Master, the Intelligence Department has sent news that Guangxi Province General Bai Kuan is now in close contact with the Southern Ming Imperial Court. It seems that there is a possibility of him being instigated at any time. 6th Young Master, listening to the contents of the telegrams read out, Yang Chendong calmly looked ahead. He knew that after taking a big detour and eliminating the surrounding dangers one by one, he would finally have to face the Southern Ming Imperial Court. Okay, got it. At this moment, Yang Chendong did not feel too much joy. After all, once the war broke out, the ones who would suffer would be the lowest class of Han people. It would not be like when they attacked other countries and factions, where they could do anything to achieve their goals. Wang Shan seemed to feel that Yang Chendong's mood was a little gloomy, so he quietly left after replying. On the other hand, Yang Er walked up in confusion and said loudly, "Young master, don't be anxious. With 500 Black Knight Dragon guards around, no one will be able to rush up to you and hurt you." Chapter 1575. His originally gloomy mood disappeared without a trace because of Beta Persei's interruption. But it was also at this moment that Yang Chendong thought of telling Beta Persei a few words. Otherwise, with this person's character, he would definitely ruin his grand plan. Beta Persei, if the enemy rushes in from the east later, young master, I will take them out of here, and you just need to guard this place well. Don't worry about me, understand? Yang Chendong said with a serious look on his face. If it were any other subordinate, he would only need to give an order for the other party to carry it out. But facing Beta Persei, who was a straightforward person, some things had to be said more specifically. Why? Beta Persei wanted to get to the bottom of this, but fortunately, he still knew his place and immediately shut his mouth. But this did not mean that he had given up. On the contrary, he said carefully, "Young master, isn't this too dangerous? Why don't you let Dao Xiao or Ba Dao Jiang lead the team? I'd better stay by your side." "No need." In order to dispel Beta Persei's thoughts and not let him take the risk, Yang Chendong said in a very decisive tone, "It's not like you don't know young master's speed. You can't keep up with me. Okay, just follow orders." Beta Persei's face immediately fell when he heard that he couldn't keep up. In terms of skill and strength, the Yang faction could be considered to be full of talents. Yang Heir was considered to be one of the top existences. There were very few people who could convince him to submit. Yang Chendong was an exception. The two of them had exchanged countless moves in private. In the past, they could deal with each other once or twice, but now, they could not even last one round against Beta Persei. This made Beta Persei angry and happy at the same time. He was angry because his skills were too weak. He should have been protecting the young master. However, most of the time, he had become an existence akin to a decoration. This made him, who boasted that he was strong enough to establish himself with his fists and feet, lose face. He was happy that the young master had such shocking skills. His safety was guaranteed, so he didn't have to worry so much. In terms of skill, he was indeed not on the same level as Yang Chendong. Although he was reluctant, Beta Persei still agreed. "Yes, young master, but you must be careful. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Yang Chendong also breathed a sigh of relief. He was really worried that Beta Persei would disregard his orders and follow him. If that was the case, he would not be able to say anything about Beta Persei's loyalty. Now that he was on his own, he didn't have to worry so much. As for his skills, perhaps it was because he had been reborn, or perhaps it was because he had Daikra with him. In short, whether it was his speed, strength, or reaction time, his body was indeed frighteningly high. In addition, the battlefield and killing techniques that he had learned in his previous life were there to assist him. Unless it was a close-range attack, as long as he had a little bit of time and opportunity to react, no one would be able to kill him. Because of this, he dared to take such a risk. It was also because of this that he dared to open an opening in the face of tens of thousands of enemies with only 500 black cavalry and set an exposed trap for the people who wanted to harm him. Not to mention, there was still the existence of the backup plan. Just now, Director Wang Shan had reported that the backup plan was in place and that they were prepared at any time. With this, now he just had to wait for the enemy to fall into the trap. Perhaps he could use this opportunity to find out the identity of the traitor. Yang Chendong was ready for battle and made all kinds of preparations. Outside the small courtyard, Wang Zhanjiang led nearly 20,000 troops and was ready to charge. They had already failed for 2 consecutive nights. They had sent out tens of thousands of soldiers and dozens of cannons, but they were still unable to do anything to an army of 500 surrounded. Even though the enemy had advanced firearms, Wang Zhanjiang was still not afraid. No matter how advanced the firearms were, they still needed to be controlled by people. He didn't believe that the enemy would be able to hold on for long under continuous attacks. As long as he had the chance to get close, the human wave tactic would be effective, and it would be time for him to reap the fruits of victory. Once he killed Bugnam of Gojoseon, his reputation would definitely soar. At that time, who would dare to look down on him? When that time came, he would be the #1 hero in the world. With this thought in mind, Wang Zhanjiang felt quite excited, and the tiredness that he had felt for the past few days seemed to have lessened. While he was looking forward to it, the sky finally darkened. Wang Zhanjiang, who couldn't wait any longer, ordered the attack to begin as soon as the sky darkened. Fire arrows flew out one after another and flew towards the surroundings of the small courtyard. In order to ensure that everyone's vision was not obstructed, Wang Zhanjiang changed his strategy of fighting in the dark 2 nights ago. He prepared countless fire arrows in advance in order to illuminate the surroundings and find the weak points of the Black Cavalry's defense to find the best path to attack. Thousands of fire arrows suddenly flew up and landed around the small courtyard. Under the connected fire, the small courtyard was illuminated as if it was daytime. The trenches dug in the small courtyard also appeared in Wang Zhanjiang's sight. Good strategy, Wang Zhanjiang laughed excitedly as he instantly understood the Black Cavalry strategy. During the day, the Black Cavalry used all kinds of methods to conceal themselves and only dug trenches. They only entered the trenches when it was dark. If they continued to attack in the dark, then even if they died in battle, no one would be able to figure out what method the Black Cavalry used. Now that the trenches were right in front of him, Wang Zhanjiang, who understood everything, had a better plan in mind. Men, prepare to light a fire and release smoke. Smoke attack was one of the most commonly used methods on the battlefield. In history, there were many records of victory through smoke attacks. However, because of the many limitations of this method of attack, although it was a good method, there were not many people who used it. But now, the Black Cavalry was surrounded within a certain range, so using smoke attacks was a good method. Under Wang Zhanjiang's order, the soldiers quickly carried dry firewood and lit it. Then, they continued to add wet firewood to the fire. Soon, smoke rose, and under the incessant fanning of the soldiers of the 3 provinces, the smoke began to blow towards the small courtyard. They're going to release smoke. With the help of the night vision device, Ba Daojiang, who was guarding the first line of defense, quickly discovered Wang Zhanjiang's intention. However, he did not panic. On the contrary, the corner of his mouth revealed a disdainful smile. At this moment, if Wang Zhanjiang could stand in front of him, he could not help but scold him for his stupidity. In front of long-range firearms, what was the effect of releasing smoke? Did they not know that all they needed to do was to land a shell on the pile of firewood to solve all the problems? Come on, where are the rocket launchers? Aim them at the pile of firewood and blow it up, Ba Daojiang said with a confident face. The rocket launchers beside him immediately got ready. Before the smoke could completely form, the rocket launchers were already fired at the small courtyard, raising the pile of firewood to the ground. Not only did the smoke not have any effect, but more than 10 people were killed or injured because of the rocket launcher. Wang Zhanjiang frowned. He was very curious about how the enemy could see his movements clearly when the sky was dark and the smoke was thick. Although it was the 16th day of the lunar calendar, the time when the moon was full, he shook his head. Shaking his head, he pushed the unhappiness in his heart to the bottom of his heart. Now was not the time to think about this. There was not much time left for him. If he could not take down Yang Chendong tonight, he was afraid that his head would be removed from his body. Men, beat the drums, charge. Under the illumination of the moonlight, accompanied by the flames everywhere, the soldiers of the 3 provinces began their suicidal charge. Just like a few days ago, the black shadows were everywhere. The soldiers of the 3 provinces pressed forward with a fearless look. Under the supervision of Wang Zhanjiang, the soldiers reluctantly charged forward. Open fire. The 500 black cavalry soldiers were naturally not going to be polite. With a shout, Ba Daojiang, who was in charge of the first line of defense, gave the order to open fire. In fact, after 2 days of fighting, the number of black cavalry soldiers was less than 500. To be precise, 13 soldiers were injured to varying degrees and could no longer participate in the battle. They could only stay in the main courtyard with Yang Chendong. Even so, the 487 black cavalry soldiers were armed with all kinds of advanced firearms. They were like a piece of metal, preventing the soldiers of the 3 provinces from approaching from all directions. Dense gunshots rang out, and the black shadows fell one by one. This battle made everyone realize the importance of weapons. When the weapons were advanced to a certain extent, it was already impossible to make up for it with manpower. The gunshots continued, and the casualties of the three provinces continued to increase. When the news reached the ears of General Wang Zhangjiang, he was calm like an old monk, and did not even frown. All of this was within his expectations. Although he did not understand where the black cavalry got the firearms and ammunition, he had no choice. In a battle of life and death, in order to give Zhu Huihua an explanation, even if he had to sacrifice all of his soldiers, so what? As long as he could get rid of Yang Chendong, all of this was worth it in his eyes. A general success was built on thousands of bones. At this moment, there was a clear reflection of the cruelty of war. Wang Zhangjiang personally supervised the battle. If any soldier wanted to retreat out of fear, once discovered, they would be killed without mercy. In this kind of battle where they would die regardless of whether they rushed forward or retreated, the soldiers had no choice. After getting used to obeying orders, they could only hope that they would be lucky enough to break through the blockade of the black cavalry and rush into the small courtyard. The soldiers of the three provincial armies, who had no other choice, showed the madness that they should have when they only had one path left to charge. Although the number of dead and injured soldiers kept increasing, after paying a huge price, they finally got closer and closer to the defending Black Knight Dragon Guards. When they were within an arrow's range, all kinds of bows and arrows began to fly, and the pressure began to increase. Chapter 1576. What's going on? Beat them back. Don't let any arrows threaten us. More and more arrows rained down on the trenches. Some of the black cavalry soldiers had already been hit by arrows. Although none of them were killed, more than a dozen soldiers were injured. Some of them even had their arms injured. This made it impossible for them to continue using their firearms in a short period of time. As Ba Daojiang shouted, a look of indignation appeared on his face. However, he didn't have a better idea. Tonight, the soldiers of the three provinces were rushing over without regard for their lives. Although the firearms in their hands were very powerful, they had limited manpower. There were less than 500 people, and they needed to guard the four directions. It was destined that the counterattack they could make was very limited. Fire 2 waves of grenades in a row. Beat back the enemies that are close to us. Captain Howling Blade had somehow arrived at Badao River and started shouting. Then, a wave of grenades was thrown in all directions. Cries of agony were heard one after another. Many of the soldiers from the three provinces who wanted to approach them were killed. The situation was stabilized again. Sigh. A heavy punch fell from the sky. Seeing that they were charging fearlessly, the opportunity to defeat the enemy had appeared. However, it was indeed a pity that they had failed because of a wave of grenades. However, Wang Zhangjiang wasn't discouraged. Since they had the opportunity just now, he believed that they would have a second chance if they continued to charge. He continued to give orders. The entire army charged forward without stopping. The battle in the inner circle was in full swing. Outside the small courtyard, the sound of gunfire and cannons had attracted more and more civilians. The appearance of the civilians wasn't that sudden. After all, the same sound had been heard for 2 consecutive nights. Anyone who wasn't deaf could hear it. The difference was that although these people were worried for the first 2 nights, they didn't do anything. But now, the civilians were making a move. From all directions, more than 15,000 civilians rushed towards the small courtyard. General Kai Wenju, who was in charge of the security of the outer circle, didn't look nervous at all. Perhaps this was due to inertia. In front of the army, the civilians were just livestock that could be driven around at will. Men, set up the formation. Archers, get ready. If the commoners dare to come close, shoot them down. Kai Wenju, who was riding on his horse, said calmly. Compared to the civilians who didn't have much fighting power, he was much more fortunate than Wang Zhangjiang, who could die at any moment in the inner circle. Cai Wenju had a calm expression on his face, but if he knew that a tenth of the 20,000 soldiers under him were cold vanguard warriors and thousands of new recruits had already been convinced by the cold vanguard warriors, he would not be able to remain so calm. As the saying goes, to catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. Cai Wenju didn't know that he had already become someone's target. Jianghu, the commander of the Cold Front Army's 1st Division and 1st Regiment, was currently hiding in the army, watching Cai Wenju's every move. Anyone who had been in the army knew that one was always the most powerful existence in an army. For example, in a company, if a company's first-grade officer died in battle, then the one to inherit their position would definitely be a platoon leader. Logically speaking, if the platoon-level officers all died in battle, the one who would inherit their positions would definitely be the platoon leader. This clearly showed the importance of this platoon leader. For Jianghu to be able to become the commander of an army's 1st Division and 1st Regiment, his ability was naturally not to be underestimated. Since he had his eyes on Cai Wenju, how could he escape from Jianghu's grasp when the enemy was in the open and Cai Wenju was in the dark? Attack! Seeing that the commoners were getting closer and closer, and that many of the soldiers from the 3 provinces had already started to knock their arrows, Jianghu, as the commander, shouted loudly. He drew his scimitar and charged towards Cai Wenju on his horse. With a shout, hundreds of cold vanguard warriors also drew their scimitars and charged towards Cai Wenju. They only had one target, General Cai Wenju on his horse. The formation suddenly became chaotic. Many of the soldiers from the 3 provinces didn't know what was going on. They only felt people charging past them, and if anyone dared to stop them, they would quickly be knocked to the ground and never be able to get up again. This sudden turn of events left many of the soldiers of the 3 provinces scratching their heads in confusion. Before they could figure out what was going on, Cai Wenju, who was riding on the horse, had his head chopped off. Blood sprayed everywhere. Jianghu's personal strength was naturally unquestionable. Just the number of cold vanguard warriors and officers trained by him numbered more than 1,000. Having fought with countless people, he had long trained himself to be invincible in close combat. Coupled with the fact that he was unprepared, it would be strange if Cai Wenju could escape. Without even having the time to react, the commander of the troops, Cai Wenju, was killed on his horse. When the other soldiers from the 3 provinces saw this scene, all of them turned pale with fright. More importantly, the person who killed the general was wearing the same uniform as them. This was the most frightening and inexplicable thing. Why did the soldiers dare to kill the general? If these people dared to kill the general, would they also dare to kill them? Put down your weapons and kneel on the ground. Otherwise, you will be killed without mercy. Waves of shouts came out one after another. More and more recruits with red cloth wrapped around their arms jumped out and shouted. The united front work done before finally played a decisive role at this moment. Jianghu's sudden attack and the active cooperation of his 4 battalion commanders, including Feng Zhan and Wang Jinlong, made the soldiers from the 3 provinces squat on the ground in confusion. Although they still didn't know what was going on, one thing was clear. If they didn't drop their weapons and squat on the ground now, they would die. This had been proven by the fact that their comrades had been killed for no reason just now. There were more and more civilians on the periphery, and the soldiers from the 3 provinces were getting closer and closer. Although there were nearly 100 spies from the Security Bureau encouraging everyone to act as the mainstay, when the soldiers from the 3 provinces were getting closer and closer, many civilians couldn't help but slow down. They were civilians and hadn't received any relevant military training. When facing regular soldiers with armor and swords, it would be a lie to say that they weren't nervous. But when they thought that if Bugnam of Gojoseon died in Yunnan Prefecture, the 5-star army would definitely take revenge. At that time, they would also be unable to escape death. Their confidence was strengthened a lot, and they didn't seem to be as scared as before. What's going on? Why isn't anyone shooting at us? Yeah, why do I see that many of these soldiers are squatting down? The distance was getting closer and closer. When they were less than 30 steps away, the civilians at the front finally saw the movements of the soldiers from the 3 provinces. The spies mixed in the crowd played a role at this time. Thinking of what the director said before, that someone would cooperate with them, how could they not know what was going on? Immediately, one by one, they shouted in the crowd, "The soldiers are mutinous. They are on the same side as us. Now, let's go with them and rescue Bugnam of Gojoseon." As soon as such shouts appeared, they rose and fell one after another without end. All the spies in the crowd also shouted in all directions, hoping to convey this fact to the ears of every civilian, so that they could move forward without worry. The fact that there were no arrows from afar was enough to explain everything. After knowing that the soldiers were like them and didn't want anything to happen to Bugnam of Gojoseon, the number of soldiers increased by a lot. They were no longer afraid, and each of them moved faster than before. There was a mutiny on the outside, and it wouldn't be long before it affected the inside. Under the attack from both sides, Wang Zhangjiang's fate was already sealed, and Yang Chendong's safety would naturally be guaranteed. It was at this time that Yang Chendong, to everyone's surprise, broke out from the east alone in a golden cloak. His body was like a fox, and he was as fast as a cheetah. This was the true portrayal of Yang Chendong's current situation. In the darkness, the golden cloak shone like a beacon. After he rushed out, he was locked on by many eyes. Golden cloak, that must be Bugnam of Gojoseon. Go after him. In the darkness, Muang, who was paying close attention to everything, like a viper lurking in the dark, had a flash of excitement in his eyes. He naturally saw the intensity of the battle just now. When he saw how the black cavalry relied on the advanced firearms in their hands to repel the attacks of the 3 provincial armies again and again, he was anxious and uneasy. After observing the battlefield, Muang came to the east. In his opinion, the defense here seemed to be weaker. If he had to launch an attack, he would definitely choose to attack here. Hiding in the east, he didn't know if the 3 provincial armies could break through the black cavalry's defense line if this continued. If they couldn't, once Yang Chendong walked out alive, who could restrain him? Where could they find such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Yang Chendong must die. Otherwise, he would have to go and die. This was the military order he gave to his uncle, Pingshi Wang Mubin, before he came. With the military order in front of him, Muang was still thinking about whether to launch an attack in the chaos. The men he brought were men of sacrifice trained by the Mu family with great effort. In terms of skills, they were naturally not comparable to the ordinary soldiers of the 3 provincial armies. Even so, he was not 100% confident that he could bring 200 men of sacrifice to the black cavalry. While he was still struggling in his heart and unable to make a final decision, Yang Chendong rushed out. Especially when the other party deliberately stopped in the process of charging. With the help of the moon, they could see his face clearly. Needless to say, Muang was excited. Chapter 1577. He thought that this mission would be very difficult to complete, and the 200 men he brought with him would be thrown here. He never thought that Yang Chendong would actually rush out. Could it be that the black cavalry's defensive line was no longer safe? It's just that this is not what Muang should care about now. What he needs to do now is to catch up with Yang Chendong and kill him. Having seen the portrait of Yang Chendong countless times, Muang believed that he would not recognize the wrong person. Therefore, after Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden cloak, rushed out from the east and kept running away, Muang took him and 200 men under him like ghosts in the night and chased after Yang Chendong. As soon as Muang moved, in the same darkness, the 100 ninjas also moved. For Yang Chendong's appearance and figure, even if he turned into ashes, Bujishi could not forget it. So in just a face-to-face, Gujishi could be 100% sure that the person who escaped was Yang Chendong. Even so, how could he let go of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Yang Chendong appeared, and he was still alone. His appearance also directly attracted the pursuit of 200 men of the Mu family and 100 ninjas. Besides, at this time, Yang Chendong, with the idea of being bold, rushed out from the protection of the black cavalry. The reason why he did this was that he wanted to lure the enemy into the trap, and secondly, doing this could also reduce the pressure on the black cavalry, so that he could go all out and fight without any scruples. It's just that when he really rushed out, Yang Chendong was not sure whether someone would chase after him or not. It wasn't until he met the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were charging at him from the outside, and used his body to quickly weave through them, that he heard the dense footsteps behind him. Only then did a relaxed smile appear on his face. With Yang Chendong's current skill, his hearing was naturally better than ordinary people. Just from the sound of those footsteps, he could feel that the strength of the people who came was definitely not comparable to the ordinary soldiers of the 3 provinces. From the orderly and light footsteps, Yang Chendong could feel that the other party's breathing was very stable. They should be the work of a well-trained master. Thinking that these people were masters, Yang Chendong couldn't help but rejoice in his actions. If it wasn't for this risk, the killers who waited for a long time and didn't have a chance to attack the small courtyard together with the soldiers of the 3 provinces. If so, the loss of the black cavalry would be inevitable. Come on, I hope you can keep up with my speed. After a smile that others couldn't see flashed across the corner of Yang Chendong's mouth, he stomped his feet on the ground and rushed forward again. With only 50% of his strength, Yang Chendong could keep a safe distance from the pursuers behind him. Yang Chendong led the way in front without any hurry. Behind him were the men of sacrifice led by Muang and the ninjas led by Chueisho. As the 2 sides chased and fled, the distance between them and the small courtyard was getting farther and farther. Keep an eye on him, don't let him run away. Muang was very excited at this time. When he spoke, he looked back, and then his eyes flashed with helplessness. Unlike Yang Chendong's skill, he could rush out of the encirclement of the 3 provinces without any injuries. When he led his men to break out of the encirclement, it took him some effort. The moment he collided with the soldiers of the 3 provinces, both sides were entangled for a short period of time. After sacrificing the lives of several men of sacrifice, he finally managed to kill his way out. This was because the soldiers of the 3 provinces were not prepared in the dark. Otherwise, Muang didn't dare to think about how many of the 200 men of sacrifice could escape alive. Now that several people have died, and all of this will fall on Yang Chendong's head, Muang's killing intent was even stronger at this time. Chueisho, who was 1 step behind them, was not any better. Just now, after a fierce battle, after losing the lives of several ninjas, they were able to rush out. Although they were reinforcements invited by Zhu Huihua, before their identity was announced, ordinary soldiers of the 3 provinces didn't know who they were. If they met on the battlefield, they were either comrades or enemies. Several ninjas died before they could catch up with the main character. Chueisho was also angry, but when he thought that he could finally catch Yang Chendong, his mood became excited again. He knew the importance of this battle. It will indicate whether the ninjas can be independent of Yangxia, and whether they have the opportunity to rebuild the small Japanese empire. And for this great goal, even if they use all their strength, even if they lose their lives, it is worth it. Both of them looked like they would not give up until they achieved their goal. The 2 teams followed Yang Chendong's footsteps closely and weaved through the southern cloud manor. Yang Chendong, who was walking in front, was undoubtedly the most relaxed person. If he wanted to, with his strength, he could easily get rid of the tail behind him, but he didn't do that. He wanted to see if there was a second force that wanted to take his life. In this way, one side fled while the other chased for about half an hour. Even when Yang Chendong felt tired, he still didn't find any new enemies. He knew that the dark forces in Yunnan Mansion were only these. He looked at the direction and went to the Xing Wang Temple in the east of the city. Xing Wang Temple. In the Great Ming Dynasty at that time, almost every town had one. It represented a kind of sustenance for the people. As the Xing Wang Temple of Yunnan Mansion, it covered a large area. It was equivalent to the size of a courtyard, and it was protected by a courtyard wall. It had its own independent courtyard. This was the cemetery Yang Chendong prepared for the people chasing behind him, and it was also the place where Yang Chendong prepared a backup plan. Just now, he had passed by it twice. He believed that the people who had been lying in ambush must have made all kinds of preparations. It was time to close the net. When he came to the Xing Wang Temple again, Yang Chendong flashed and jumped in the wall. His whole person disappeared into the darkness like a ghost. Following behind him were Muang and the others. Several men with good body skills also flew up, grabbed the courtyard wall and jumped in. Soon the door was opened from the inside, and more men rushed in from the door. Nearly 200 men rushed into the Xing Wang Temple with the fastest speed, which made Ishiki, who followed closely behind, couldn't help but stop. He only stopped for a few seconds, and then he rushed in with nearly 100 ninjas. "Who are you people?" As soon as they entered the courtyard, a group of men turned around and surrounded Ishiki and the others. The ninjas were not willing to be outdone, and they all held their ninja swords in their hands, ready to fight at any time. During the pursuit, Muang knew that there was another group of pursuers behind him. However, he didn't know who these people were, so he didn't pay attention to them. After all, killing Yang Chendong was the most important task. But now, the two sides finally collided, and it was time for an explanation. "Don't be nervous, we are also looking for Bugnam of Gojoseon to take his life." Ishiki stepped forward and looked at Muang, who was nervous. This wasn't because Ishiki was afraid of Muang. In this dark night, although he didn't have the number of people, he was confident that he could win. It's just that he didn't forget that Yang Chendong was his target, and he didn't want to complicate things before that. How could Muang not think the same way? Although he didn't know the strength of his opponents, he didn't see them coming. However, when they saw him, they did not immediately attack him. This proved everything. They weren't Yang Chendong's subordinates, and with this, he won't be an enemy before completing the mission. Well, I will believe you for the time being. Now Yang Chendong is in this Xing Wang Temple, let's look for him carefully. Muang stopped his men from attacking and turned around to go inside the Xing Wang Temple. He had already arranged people to guard outside the temple. If Yang Chendong wanted to escape, he wouldn't be able to escape from his eyes. The two groups of people were divided into several teams, and they began to slowly move forward. They went to one temple after another, and it seemed like they were going to turn this place upside down to find Yang Chendong. In the dark, Yang Chendong's eyes had already been put on the most advanced night vision goggles, and he was watching Muang and Ishiki slowly approaching him. At this moment, Yang Chendong's eyes were filled with an inexhaustible anger, all because he saw Ishiki. Although the other party was dressed in black at this time, and there was a black mask on his face, but just like the other party could easily recognize him, he also recognized the other party. Ishiki is dead, he died in the assassination of Mandolatu. This is a well-known thing in Yangxia. But no one would have thought that in order to deter the world, Manto Ratu hung all the assassins on the wooden pole to warn the world. Because of this action, the secret agents of the Security Bureau carefully examined the corpses, but they didn't find the leader of the ninja clan, Kuroshio Shinobi. When this information was reported to Yang Chendong, he was a little more vigilant. For this reason, he has taken some precautions, but at that time, Yang Chendong was still optimistic that Ishiki might have been burned, or he might have escaped with serious injuries and died. After all, he is a special ninja, and his strength is not comparable to ordinary people. This was just a kind of hope. However, when Chui Shi appeared in the Xing Wang Temple, Yang Chendong knew that he had been too optimistic. This person is not dead, and he wants to kill him. Thinking that if he didn't save him, Ishiki would have died, and there would be no ninja today. And it was his own kindness that led to all of this. The anger in his heart couldn't be extinguished. Yang Qindong hates betrayal, especially after betrayal. They want to harm him. With this, there will be no good result for Ishiki today. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.